Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Soul Chess in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 151, Cornelia Lee Britannia, The Witch is Born. September 11, 2010 ATB. Karakara Town. With the fall of Karakara Town, no more rose to challenge Britannia. When it was announced, over the radio and on the news, that Britannia had finally conquered Japan, everyone believed their hero to be dead. Tatsuki punched the nearest rock in tense rage. Kigo was in utter shock. Uriah looked solemn and Chad was impossible to read. Tatsuki expected Orium to break down and cry into a sobbing mess, but when she looked at her friend she saw strong, resolved eyes. Those were not the eyes of someone that was ready to grieve for their lost love. Orium trotted towards the ladder and Tatsuki followed after her. "Orium, where are you going?" "I'm going to find Ichigo," she told Tatsuki with a confident tone. "I'm going to change the way I look, change my name and try and find him." "He's gone, Orium. He's not coming back." "I want proof," Orium stated. "Pardon? Ichigo told me that he would come back or that I should try and find him. If Britannia really has taken him, then I will pick up where he left off." "Are you stupid or something? We just tried that. There is always resistance. Ichigo said that too, that if he should die that Japan should not let his sacrifice end their hopes of rebellion. I will find Ichigo or proof of his demise and Britannia will answer for what they have done." Tatsuki could hear it in Orium's voice. Despite showing an incredibly strong will and fierce determination, Orium was incredibly hurt on the inside. It was like the day she first obtained the Shunshunrika. "You're sure he's still out there?" "He has to be." Orium's stern gaze wavered a little bit. "All right then," Tatsuki put a hand on her shoulder, "I'll help you look then. Stay out of sight and blend in with the resistance." "What are you going to do?" Tatsuki rubbed the knuckle of her thumb underneath her chin. "Ichigo said that he thinks Lelouch knows a lot about this. Somewhere down the line, Lelouch changed his name from Six Britannia Lelouch to Lamperouge Lelouch. I'm going to find him and I'm going to keep as close as an eye I can on him." "How do you plan on doing that?" Orium asked. "I'll find a way," Tatsuki told her. "Hey!" she called out to the others. "Quit moping and get your asses over here." Chad, Uriah, and Kigo came up to her and Orium. Tatsuki explained what she and Orium were planning on doing. "Are you sure that's a great idea?" Uriah asked. "We've been seen. Britannia has a bounty on our heads. Were you not paying attention? We're wanted criminals, Arisawa. Then we change our names and identities. Karakara Town is gone. We have to accept that. We need to move on. If Lelouch knew something about this, then it's in our best interest to ingratiate ourselves into society and do something around his live self." "But how do we know where he'll turn up?" Uriah asked. "We don't, so we'll have to use common sense to make good estimates. Between the five of us, if we start wandering around Japan long enough, we'll bump into him, or Ichigo, or both." "What about our Lelouch, the one we all know?" Kigo asked. "I don't know if he's going to come by, but there will be an easy way to tell the difference," Tatsuki said and tugged at her clothes. "It's not a far-fetched idea to say that Lelouch can't wear a Jigei while he's still alive. He'll always be in soul form. We'll find him though, I'm sure of it. If not, we can shake down whatever representatives we can." Tatsuki took out her cell phone. "We keep in contact by email only. Whatever role you take, keep in character and don't use your powers unless it's absolutely necessary, by which you'll have to give up your identity. We can't be found out." "Sounds like a plan," Uriah said. "I agree," Kigo nodded. "I like the plan," Chad said in monotone. "Good then. Remember, even with 2 of our members gone we are still the Karakara 7. We are what will give Japan hope to rise up again. Though our nation has been taken from us, we will get it back. Is everyone keen on this?" The others nodded. "Good, then let's go." October 23, 2010 ATB. Pendragon. Cornelia was once again on leave with no assignments. It had been a little over a month since she had helped end the war and one of the first few times she had finally had some time to herself. She had been given a medal for her efforts in the war and been promoted straight to Major General. Right now, she was in her room sipping tea. She looked over to see where the medal hung on the wall and then back down at the table in despair. How can a hunk of metal possibly replace what I've lost? Ironic to her statement, Cornelia hadn't actually lost anything. North of Tokyo, in a metal van, with Suzaku, were Lelich and Nunnally. Lelich suddenly sneezed. "Bless you," Nunnally said. "Thanks," Lelich sniffed. "You know, here in Japan, there's a superstition that, if you sneeze, it means someone's talking about you behind your back," Suzaku said. "Oh please," Lelich rolled his eyes, "like I'd believe that. No one would ever talk about me except my siblings, and besides..." He glanced at the ground in despair. "I'm dead to them." "Cornelia, you liar." "Lelich, what's wrong?" "Cornelia said she'd come for Nunnally and me, but where is she?" "She's not here at all." "She's a liar. She lied to me to make me feel better. She and everyone else in the family probably thought I was going to be dead. Well, I'll show them. I'll destroy Britannia." Back in her room, Cornelia was looking at the ornamental chess piece from the board of Lelich's she had recovered. "This is all I have to remember you by." Cornelia stared at the chess piece in her hand. She thought it quite ironic that she had picked up the piece in her hand of all pieces. Lelich predominantly played black in chess. It was the king's job to command the battlefield, but it was the queen's job to protect the king. The king was the most important. The queen was the most powerful. "We'll align our families and together we'll outlive our father and create a kinder, gentler Britannia, free of prejudice." Cornelia gripped the chess piece in her hand and slumped over the table and buried her knuckles up against her eye. She had promised to be Lelich's queen and she failed. She promised herself that, even if Marianne was gone, that she would not lose her children too. She was like a second mother to Lelich and Nunnally. She cared about them, and she had failed them. "I feel so stupid." Cornelia mentally beat herself up. Suddenly, a knock came at her door. Cornelia didn't respond. "Cornelia?" "Euphemia said you were in here." It was Schneeisel. "What's he doing here?" Cornelia wondered. She walked over to the door and opened it to see her half-brother. She didn't greet him, she just wiped her eyes. She wanted to say hello, but she just couldn't. She was too shaken, too sad. "Cornelia, are you okay?" Schneeisel asked. "No." Cornelia answered honestly. "I'm sorry, did I catch you at a bad time?" Schneeisel asked her. "And no, it's just..." Cornelia turned away from Schneeisel. "Cornelia, there was nothing you could have done without getting to Japan sooner. It's not your fault." Schneeisel told her. "I don't care if it's my fault or not, I failed." Cornelia shouted, shutting her eyes. Tears were now falling from her face, staining the carpet. "I risked everything and I still failed." She walked over to her bedpost, raked her nails down it and just cried a little. "Lady Marianne wouldn't want to see you beating yourself up like this," Schneeisel told her. Cornelia became angry. Her eyes turned enraged and she whirled around, shouted, "Don't you dare tell me what she would want. If Lady Marianne were still here, this wouldn't have happened in the first place." She panted a little until her panting turned to sobbing before she started crying again. "I'm sick of being weak, sick of failing. The only person I haven't lost yet is Euphemia." Cornelia clenched her teeth together and stood in place, crying. She was surprised when Schneeisel put his arms around her and pushed her head into his chest. "It's going to be okay, Cornelia," Schneeisel told her. "I'm right here." Cornelia sobbed into Schneeisel's chest, finding comfort from her month-younger half-brother. In less than half a year, Cornelia had lost her idol and her second and third most precious siblings. Anyone in her position, no matter how strong, would be brought to a blubbering mess by the events. When she finally calmed down enough that she was only sniffing, Schneeisel put his hands on his sister's shoulders. "I know it's hard, believe me, I miss Lelich and Nunnally too. If you're sick of being weak, then you need to become strong. You must find your own strength and become the most skilled nightmare pilot and soldier you can be. This is all that damn Japanese's fault, if he hadn't gotten in my way, no. It wasn't just him, If those 7 numbers hadn't put up such a spirited defense, this would not have happened. Cornelia clenched her fists. Cornelia turned away from Schneeisel and just stared at the wall. Thank you, Schneeisel, I think I'll be fine now. You don't sound it, Cornelia. Please, surely there is something I can do. Cornelia looked over her shoulder with a teary-eyed, vulnerable look. Please file a notice to General Darlton under Article 619, Emotional Compromise. I cannot pilot or be an effective soldier in my condition, Cornelia told Schneeisel. I can't and won't do it. Schneeisel bowed to his militaristic sister, as you wish. I think some time off would be good for you. He then left. Cornelia stared at the wall. As she stood there, bitterly detesting her failure, her hatred of one Britannian-slaying sword-wielding orange-headed bastard started expanding itself to the hatred of all the Japanese, or 11s as they were coming to be called. Of course, he wasn't solely held accountable. There was no doubt in Cornelia's mind that Lelich's death had been brought upon during the widespread panic. He was a liability at that point. They probably knew she, or anyone willing to rescue him, had come. Her father had doomed Lelich the moment he made that war declaration. He was now on the list of people she hated. Hate. It was a strong word, but it was all that was in Cornelia's soul as of this point. She clenched her fist and gnashed her teeth in anger. The 11s were responsible for her brother's death and she would make them pay. No, she would make all who opposed Britannia pay, just like she made the Demdingt Alliance pay. She would make sure no one else in her family was lost to the numbers, the soon-to-be numbers, or any of Britannia's enemies. One day, Britannia would dominate the entire world, of that Cornelia was certain. She herself would make sure to crush all of its enemies. That was how she would cope with the situation. She realized, however, that she would still have to do something for Lelich, something for his peace, and perhaps her own as well. She forced a smile. I'll investigate Lady Mary Anne's death. I will put the culprit behind bars, that's what I'll do. No. I'll make sure he's executed. Tortured first, then executed. Since Cornelia had nailed Evans before Mary Anne's death, it meant that it had been a branch of the Inked Alliance or some stragglers that had managed to pull off the murder. Or perhaps, Evans was just a decoy and there was someone even higher on the chain of command for her to eliminate. That would mean there's another traitor in our midst. Cornelia's smile turned into a harsh scowl not unlike the one on the Japanese she had killed with her new tricked-out nightmare. And, like the man she had killed, this scowl would be here to stay. She no longer had a reason to smile at the world. In that moment, Cornelia Lee Britannia had finished an irreversible metamorphosis, which had begun with the death of Mary Anne Six Britannia. Gone was the smiling, able-bodied, energetic female soldier. In her place, the eyes of a veteran soldier and the expression of a merciless killer could be seen. I may not be there yet, but one day I will rise straight to the top. I will command Britannia's forces and, one day, once I have helped my father, and Britannia, conquer the entire world, I will take the nation for myself to rule. I will become Britannia's rightful and righteous queen. I will create a world that Lelich and Nunnally would have wanted to live in. Britannia is mine to rule. If I must, I will kill Guinevere and Odysseus. No one will stand in my way. Without Lelich, only I am worthy to rule Britannia. Cornelia turned around and grabbed the end of her cape, holding it over herself. Just me. Because I am the second princess, third in line for the Britannian throne and a major general in the Britannian army, Cornelia threw her cape out at her side, Cornelia Lee Britannia. Taking a moment to calm down, Cornelia exited her room and headed towards the washroom to take a long, hot bath. She figured the hot water would cleanse more than just her pores. However, as she made her way down there, she heard what sounded like crying. She then noticed that Yuffie's door was mostly closed. Euphemia. Cornelia pushed open the door. It creaked a little and, when she got a good view of the room, she saw Yuffie bent over her bedside, hands in her face, sobbing. Euphemia. Cornelia moved as quickly as she could to her sister's side and knelt down at it. She rubbed Yuffie's back. Euphemia, whatever is the matter? Yuffie mumbled something into her quilt in a high-pitched whine. Cornelia didn't understand a word she said. Euphemia, I can't hear you if you don't talk directly to me. Yuffie picked her head up and looked at Cornelia, eyes dripping with tears. It didn't work. What didn't work? Cornelia asked, distraught by her sister's uncontrolled sobbing. Euphemia, what's the matter? She held her sister by her shoulders. Yuffie hiccuped from her crying, you couldn't save them. Lelouch and Nunnally, they're gone. I'm sorry Euphemia. I did everything I could, please don't hate me. It's my fault. I wasn't strong enough. Cornelia found herself getting emotional too, please don't cry. I can't help it, Yuffie sniffed, it's not your fault though sis. You did everything you could. Then why are you crying? If you don't blame me, why are you so sad? I should be more distraught than you, I was there. Because you gave me hope, Euphemia sniffed, I thought that, as long as Big Sis was there, Yuffie hiccuped 2 sobs, that Lelouch and Nunnally would be okay. I thought if I could motivate you that they would be okay. You're not to blame. You did what you could, but it wasn't enough. I don't know who to blame. I almost feel like blaming myself. Yuffie whined the last sentence and then started rubbing her eyes with the backs of her hands. Don't say that, Cornelia shook her, you did nothing wrong. You don't need to cry. Please don't be sad Euphemia. It'll be all right. As she said this, Cornelia realized how empty her words were. It wasn't going to be all right. Her idol was dead. Her siblings were dead. And what did she have to show for it? A promotion in a tricked-out nightmare frame. Cornelia broke down and held Yuffie to her. Damn it. Goddamn it. Why wasn't I able to rescue them? Euphemia, I'm so sorry. You don't need to apologize, Yuffie said through tears. There's nothing else I can do. I failed. It's not going to be all right. Things will never be all right again, and all because I couldn't protect our siblings. The 2 sisters held on to each other, comforting each other's sorrow. Cornelia and Yuffie held on to each other and grieved for the loss of their siblings. April 2011 ATB. Soul Society. The new semester at the Shino Academy had started, and with the start of new life there was also a new announcement made to the public eye. Since October, Susanna had helped Lelouch recover from his depression. He made a very decent recovery. Without her, without anyone, it was likely he would have fallen into a state of complete and utter despair. Today was his first day back on the job from having some time off, and it was also a specially scheduled captain's meeting. On top of that, he had already put in a word with Anohana to ask for help regarding what he knew was coming up in 6 years. There would be a lot of paperwork that needed to be drafted, and a lot of clearances would have to be made. Besides just some low-ranking officers and academy students that Lelouch would be allowed to bring for Kenso practice, Lelouch was working on getting authorization for many members of the Phantoms and some of his other close companions. He was restricted to the number of senior officers he could borrow. Even Anohana didn't want to go through all of the paperwork and problems that would be required of having to keep track of so many Gentei Kaijo limits for just a mass Kenso that could be handled by low-ranking officers as easily as it could be conducted by captains. So far Lelouch was bringing the following friends and allies with him: Shiba Rukia, Lamrouge Susanna, Hinamori Momo, Matsumoto Rangiku, Shiba Kyukaku, Aloman Shisato, about 3 dozen squad members and 180 students, 10 for each year in the academy and level of difficulty. Anohana couldn't stop Lelouch from using his own squad, but outside it she could restrict him. Unfortunately she said she might not be able to get Momo clearance unless the girl showed proper aptitude. Lelouch was confused as to that statement, but he figured he could ask Momo next time he saw her. Besides this being Lelouch's first day back, this was also the day for the ceremony that Squad 4 would be getting its new captain. Lelouch hadn't been keeping up with the news as best as he should and hadn't done much walking around, so he hadn't heard of anyone applying for the captain's position. He didn't feel like asking. He knew pretty much everyone important in the Siriti. He figured he'd know the new captain by name and face. He, like many others, were still getting used to Anohana standing where Yamamoto used to stand and Vera sitting off in the corner, head bowed, legs squatted. Lelouch looked around from his position in between Jin and Shunsui. Kenpei was across from him, as always, and stood in between Yukatake and Tissen. Next to Tissen stood Yuna, and next to her was Hitsugaya. At the end of the row was Hisuna. Across from Hisuna stood Stefan, and there was a gap in between Stefan and Byakuya. There had been one for several years now. Now if only the Gotei could get a vice-captain position for Squad 9, everything would be in top form, or so Lelich thought. As he looked around, it was then that he noticed how nervous Hitsugaya seemed, which confused him slightly. He couldn't think of a reason Hitsugaya would have to be nervous. Anohana began the ceremony. I put a lot of thought and effort into searching for someone with the proper talent to become my replacement. As you know, I wanted someone who I believed could follow my proper healer's instinct as the new squad captain, and someone who would be good for Isane. I believe I have finally found that person. My replacement is still a little nervous, but all of you know her and I expect her to be treated with proper respect, despite her frailty and inexperience. Anohana lifted her head higher and called to the doorway. You may enter. The double doors opened and Lelich was floored by who stepped in, and now he understood Hitsugaya's nervousness. In walked a young woman standing at 161.5 centimeters. She had short, plum hair and hazel eyes. Her hair came down to her shoulders and she had the smallest chest amongst the female captains, the others being Hisuna, Yuna, and Anohana, though she wasn't flat by any means. She had her bangs parted in the front and she had 2 braids in her hair to tie off a portion of her hair along the sides of her cheeks. The cloth used to braid her hair was red and she was smiling as she entered with the 4th Division Haori on her back. She smiled at Lelich and then bowed to the captains. Good day, everyone, the young woman bowed. My name is Hinamori Momo. Starting today I'll be assuming the responsibility of the captain of Squad 4. I look forward to working with everyone. She stood up straight and then closed her eyes as she gave everyone the biggest, most cheerful smile she could. Seeing his student look so happy, Lelich felt a sense of joy wash over him. Momo had been through so much suffering of her own. She had been just a naive, sweet innocent girl, one that Lelich had corrupted to see the world as it truly was. She knew the ins and outs, put on a smile to hide that she was like him, and yet as she smiled, Lelich almost felt as if none of it mattered, that she was truly happy to say just what she had said. Momo strode farther into the hall and took her spot in between Stefan and Byakuya, across from Hitsugaya. After seeing Momo's smile, Lelich felt that if Momo could be happy in the life she led, then so could he. She was a girl who had just as much reason to complain and feel down and be brooding as he did, wasn't letting it get to her. True, Lelich was all the more fucked up compared to Momo, but no one put on a smile like that unless that truly had a reason to be happy. He never imagined that twice in his life it would be his student that would guide him back on the proper path to where he belonged. Lelich stopped looking so fierce and his expression broke out into one of content. Momo, I'll have to thank you later. Hinamori Teiko, I'm sure you'll do just fine adapting to your new position. Momo bowed politely. I understand the responsibility involved with taking up the role of the 4th Division captain. I will do my best not to disappoint. You don't have to be like that, Hisuna spoke up with a smile, we're here to support you. We help each other. Personal statements and affections can wait until after the meeting, Anohana cut in sharply. Ah, right, Hisuna sweated a little, my apologies. Now then, Anohana said softly, let us continue with today's meeting. The meeting mainly consisted of the budget now that the 4th Division had a proper captain. And, as usual, it was usually Hisuna and Byakuya offering up pocket change or Lelich willing to make a few cuts out of his own pocket if they were negligible, since the man never felt he personally needed all that much to get by. After the meeting, Lelich had a chat with Hitsugaya while Momo talked with Hisuna and Yuna. I had no idea Momo even wanted to become a captain. I thought she was totally loyal to you, Lelich said to the white-haired ice user. She didn't want to at first, but, as you know, she, Abarai and Shibukayan are the only ones with mastered Bankais. What did Anohana Suteiko say to convince her? Lelich asked. She didn't say anything, I did. Lelich looked curiously at Hitsugaya. Don't mistake me. I enjoyed having her as my vice-captain. It made it easy for me to sleep at night knowing that she was only a short walk away, but ever since you married Susanna I've been doing some thinking. About what? You let Nemia go several times because you were afraid you would lose her, but then, for whatever reason, you felt you had the ability to protect someone and not lose them and you chose Susanna, Hitsugaya told Lelich. I've always wanted nothing more than to protect Momo from harm, but if I shelter her and keep her from achieving her potential, then it only shows my insecurity in being afraid to lose her. Well, you made a step in the right direction, now do something about it, Lelich said. Pardon? You like her, don't you? Lelich asked. Hitsugaya seemed slightly embarrassed and turned his head away. Yes, well, she's very important to me. Have you told her that? You and Susanna both, Hitsugaya scoffed. Now that you're married, both of you suddenly think you're masters of romance and everything. Lelich extended his palms out and bent back his wrists as his arms hung out at his sides. Romance is just another thought process of the human mind, of which I am incredibly good at reading. My accomplishments can tell you that much. I said this to Ichigo once and now I say it to you, be honest with who you care about. I just don't know if Momo thinks of me like that. Even if she doesn't, don't you think you deserve closure to know if you are wasting your time? You're right, Hitsugaya sighed and then frustratingly and agitatedly added, you're always right. Good, Lelich pat the white-haired captain twice on the shoulder, glad we could have this talk. The Philippines. To further establish their security over the area, Britannia deployed its forces to the Philippines to take it over and have further control of the Pacific. The battlefront was led by none other than Major General Cornelia Lee Britannia, the goddess of victory. It didn't matter to Cornelia who her targets were, or what the purpose of the battle was. All she knew was that Britannia was continuing to conquer the world and she was happy to oblige. With unfeeling robotic movements and reactions, Cornelia wordlessly and emotionlessly opened fire on the Filipinos. Her custom nightmare frame had been improved to better proficiency after the Japanese war front and was the basis on which further Gloucesters would be put in production. With the success of the Glasgow models, mass production for the Sutherland models were already beginning and would be used in the next war front. Cornelia's trigger finger that fired her assault rifle was controlled and methodical as she rained down swift deaths upon her foes. She found solace in her nightmare frame, used any excuse she could to pilot it. The woman has ceased using her gift to see and help spirits. Any mention of spirits, spirituality, the unknown, and the supernatural brought an inexplicable irritation to her caused by what had happened in Japan, a country known for those elements. Because of the complete lack of these elements, the destruction and establishment of the Philippines was much easier than the destruction and establishment of Japan. There were no overpowered young adult metahumans to deal with, no masked creatures to get in her way and no close calls to require Cornelia to use her spiritual power. It took only 2 weeks to clean out the Filipinos and get them to surrender, to which the politicians would then handle the establishment of the area. Cornelia currently stood in the middle of a deserted area, by her nightmare frame, drinking a bottle of water. The war was pretty much over. The conditions of surrender were the only thing remaining to establish before Cornelia would be sent home. Suddenly, however, she saw unfamiliar enemy vehicles and soldiers coming up the horizon and immediately jumped back in the cockpit. The men attacking her were freedom fighters, rebels who believed they could take on the Empire despite the end of the war. Looks like some people missed the memo. Cornelia opened fire and activated her land spinner propulsion system to zoom forward after her enemies. She skewered the few tanks they had with her Harkins and took a low-flying gunship out of the air with her lance. The infantry surrounding her attacked the Gloucester's legs with rockets and RPGs. Cornelia promptly turned them into roadkill. More and more enemies spawned around her, making Cornelia feel as if they had been waiting for her to become isolated from her men before attacking her. Cornelia didn't even bother radioing for reinforcements. The skill of the men attacking her was laughable. It was funny to her how they thought they stood a chance against a military prodigy and a media-proclaimed goddess of victory. Cornelia's nightmare was built with reinforced plating. The RPG and rocket rounds may as well have been firing spit wads at her. As she fought, losing count of how many enemies she was felling, Cornelia broke out into laughter. It started as a small chuckle at first, but before Cornelia knew it, she had a crazed smile on her face and was cackling maniacally as she slaughtered the enemy resistance with frenzied fervor and energy. Her zealous behavior gave the resistance the idea that they had bitten off more than they could chew and began to run from the crazed second princess, but Cornelia gave chase. She was having too much fun. Yes, fun, she realized it now. The slaughtering of her enemies, piloting her nightmare frame and feeling invincible was incredibly fun. As she pursued, she heard the men cry out in Filipino-accented Britannian, monster. She monster. Monster. Cornelia asked with a smile and laughed a little, I am no monster. Cornelia had no idea her microphone was on. If you will call me any sort of fearful title, then I am a witch. With excited focus Cornelia held down the trigger on her assault rifle, emptying the magazine and inadvertently activating her spiritual power to keep firing her spiritual rounds. Explosions were everywhere, people were dying. Cornelia pursued to the point where she came upon an unfound settlement during the war and leveled it until she was surrounded by smoke and fire. When she was done, all she did was laugh that same manic cackle she had earlier. Goddess? What kind of goddess delivers death? Goddesses are benevolent, dainty creatures of merriment, of which I am most certainly not. She began to speak with a crazed smile and uncharacteristic frenzy and mania. I am the creature you want to burn at the stake, but will never be able to touch. I am cursed. Cursed. I have powers unexplainable by the mortal world. They are unholy powers the likes of which allow me to destroy all who stand in my way in large segments at a time. Goddess I am not, which I be. Curse me from the land of the dead and know that your lives are forfeit against the witch of Britannia. From there Cornelia continued to drive across the landscape killing hundreds of civilians, murdering unarmed civilians whenever she found an undiscovered settlement. She saw enemies of the Empire everywhere, future members of a reformed Inked Alliance, potential superhumans to rob her of her sister as they had taken Lelich and Nunnally, and anyone else she could think of even the flimsiest justification to eliminate. Cornelia, of course, only became a crazy psychotic killer while piloted in her nightmare frame. Outside it she was relatively normal, if but a scowling hateful racist and dog of the Empire. In times of solace though, Cornelia was able to maintain that this was all for her dead siblings and idol. She wanted to help Britannia conquer the world and establish a new ruler atop it. She decided that her place was on the battlefield and not the throne room, so she'd done a bit of pairing up with her siblings. She figured Schneeisel and Yuffie would make the perfect replacement emperor or empress. Perhaps she'd try to arrange a marriage between them. And that is what motivated her to invite Schneeisel to the manor. The year was 2013. The weather was warm and the season of summer. Area 15 had been established recently and Cornelia had just returned from putting down an uprising in Area 14. The second prince and princess sat and talked in the Lee Britannia garden while Yuffie played with the family dog. Yuffie's grown so much, Schneeisel noted. She's how old now? She'll be 13 this year, Schneeisel, Cornelia answered him. She's grown quite lovely, hasn't she? Schneeisel responded. Cornelia chuckled, she's still very much a child. Schneeisel laughed, especially compared to resplendent goddess of the battlefield, Princess Cornelia. Anyone else and Cornelia would have flown into a rage about how she didn't fit the description of goddess, but her siblings were allowed to get away with such things, especially Schneeisel. Cornelia could barely feel the slight blush on her cheeks. You flatter me too easily, brother. Not at all, Schneeisel dismissed his sister's humbleness, by all accounts your suppression of the Area 14 uprising was brilliant. Cornelia smirked confidently. They put up no more resistance than anticipated. I expected you would stay on to be Viceroy of Area 14. Cornelia's smirk grew into a crooked smile, that country is pacified. It no longer has the will to oppose the Empire. Anyone can run it now. Cornelia, you have to leave them a little bit of strength and dignity to resist. Cornelia was confused. Resistance led to uprisings and uprisings led to the exact thing that caused her to lose Lelich and Nunnally. Why do you say that? She kept a civil tone with Schneeisel. People with broken spirits are unproductive. The will to fight is itself a resource. If you sap it completely, an area loses its vitality. Isn't it better for us Britannians to bring vitality to lands we conquer? Cornelia inquired, finding this belief to be the better option. Schneeisel was all the more Cornelia's intellectual superior, so Cornelia questioned his logic rather than simply outright lashing out at him. There's a limit to what we can do. That's why we have the honorary Britannian system, Schneeisel explained. Which blurs the line between the rulers and the ruled. Cornelia spoke calmly, but it was easy to see her contempt for the system. If you don't keep that distinction clear, you're just inviting trouble. By this time Yuffie had made her way towards the garden table only to notice the serious look on Schneeisel and Cornelia's faces. "Oh, you look like you're discussing something important. Am I interrupting?" "No, you aren't interrupting at all, little one," Schneeisel told her. "Oh, I'm not a little child anymore, you know," Yuffie said, trying to stand as tall as she could. Schneeisel laughed and when he calmed down asked, "Tell me, Yuffie, what would you do if you became a viceroy?" "Huh? Well, I think I'd like to make the country a place where everyone could live happily," Yuffie answered sweetly. Both Cornelia and Schneeisel giggled. "That's right," Schneeisel commented on Yuffie's answer, "Yuffie has the highest of intentions." "Is that really something to laugh at?" Yuffie asked, a little offended. No, Schneeisel told her to explain himself, "It's not bad at all." He returned his attention to the older Brighton sibling. "So Cornelia, I wanted to recommend that you become the next viceroy of Area 11. Area 11, the former Japan." Cornelia wanted to make sure Schneeisel knew exactly what he was saying. She and Area 11 had some bad blood to deal with that ran through her brain and heart for years on end. "Yes, resistance activity is starting to heat up there. I think the assignment would suit your talents." Cornelia's mind rattled around quickly, trying to find any excuse not to go to the landscape formerly known as Japan. The idea that pockets of resistance were sprouting like wildfire, while unsettling, was not enough of a reason for Cornelia to feel that she needed to step back into the world of the unknown. If unexplainable phenomena were on the rise, she'd return, but for now she had to do everything she could not to go back. She could see it already. Every day she would wake up and remember that this was the place she had lost two things that mattered so much to her. Every day she would wake up and think of ways to make the 11s pay for costing her those two things. Every day she would remember that Lelich and Nunnally died on the soil she stood upon. Every single day. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. "Schneeisel," Cornelia began, "if it's possible I'd like to be in charge of opening a new area for us." Yes, that was the brilliant solution. Conquer the world as quickly as possible. More blood, more violence, more destruction. Cornelia would get her fill of war and she would be closer to her goals all the same. "I see, then who should we send?" Schneeisel asked her. "Emil, or Oscar perhaps?" Cornelia suggested, naming two of her half-brothers. "They're going to areas 13 and 15. "That's already been decided," Schneeisel told her. "How about Clovis?" "That's out of the question," Cornelia said without hesitation. "But why?" "He's too soft," Cornelia again answered without hesitation. "You have a point," Schneeisel stated, "he's not really suited to running an occupation." It was then that the screen door opened to outside. Into the scene entered, of all people, Clovis. Cornelia wondered what he was doing here. She hadn't exactly called for him. "Good day, brother," he said to Schneeisel, bowing. "Sister," he bowed again, "and you too, Yuffie." "Hello, Clovis," Schneeisel added and then muttered, "Speak of the devil. I heard you had returned, Cornelia," Clovis said to the second princess, taking her gloved hand in his as he bowed forward, close enough that he was inches away from kissing it if he wanted to. "I came to welcome you." Cornelia pulled her hand away immediately and rather than making a comment or thanking Clovis she took a stab at his fashion sense. "As usual you are wearing clothes that restrict your movement. People like you are the first to die during an attack." "Such harsh words after we've been apart for so long," Clovis said, standing up and taking a few steps back. "You haven't changed a bit, still all business." The last time Clovis and Cornelia had seen each other was during the pool party. "Clovis, have you at least learned to pilot a nightmare frame?" Cornelia wanted to make sure her brother had some survival sense. "I heard they've been deployed in combat lately." "How long has it been since we first saw them demonstrated, by Lady Marianne?" "It was right after Lelich and the others moved to Ares Villa." "Lelich?" Yuffie looked sad. "Oh, forgive me, Yuffie. I've brought up painful memories for you." "No, it's okay," Yuffie responded. And really, it was okay now. Cornelia had been there for her. As long as the siblings had each other, their lives could go on, and that was how both siblings felt. Both Cornelia and Yuffie had no idea what they would do without the other. If only they could have been saved, Cornelia said and looked at the ground. If only I could have saved them. It couldn't be helped, Clovis said to her, things were different back then. No one could have imagined we'd go to war with Japan. It was ignorant comments like this that made Cornelia believe even further that Clovis was not suited to lead anything. He was unaware of the great effort Cornelia had made to save her siblings or the fact that anyone in the military knew that negotiations were failing faster than the heart rate of a person in need of quadruple bypass. Cornelia didn't hold that against Clovis personally, of course, only professionally. The truth is, I just made a formal request to His Majesty the Emperor. Schneeisel furrowed his brow. About what? I asked that he dispatch me to Area 11 and put me in charge there. Cornelia was shocked. But I thought you hated assignments like that. I sort of had a change of heart, Clovis answered. What brought that on? Schneeisel inquired, if I may ask. 36 losses and 37 battles. Schneeisel crinkled his brow further. That's my win-loss record in chess. I don't really like to admit it, but no matter how hard I tried I could never beat Lelich. Didn't you tie him once? Cornelia asked, following the logic in what Clovis had just said. No, Clovis answered, that game was interrupted. It started out looking like I was going to win, but... You sure he wasn't letting you win? Cornelia teased. He would never ever do that, Clovis responded, offended, not his style. I knew him very well. Why didn't you play him to the end of the game? Yuffie asked. He had a sudden audience with His Majesty. That was our last match. He never came back, so, in the end, I missed my one chance to beat him. I see, Schneeisel smiled in content, so that's why. Lately, I've started to think of the conflict in Area 11 as a chess problem he left me to solve. It's unusual for you to put so much thought into something like that. Cornelia spoke calmly, but she was outright mocking Clovis on this one. I'd like to set matters right. Clovis, Yuffie interrupted her brother's train of thought. Did I tell you Lelich sent me a letter once when he was living in Area 11? About what? Clovis asked. He said he made friends with a Japanese boy. Oh, he made friends with a number. I wonder what it's like over there, Yuffie said, puzzled, in Japan. If you're interested, why not join me? Cornelia was not about to let that happen. Don't be ridiculous. I'd like to go see it, but I have school. Of course, Schneeisel smiled, it's too soon for you. Do you enjoy going to school? Yes. Yuffie exclaimed happily, very much. Well then, Clovis prepared to leave, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to put the finishing touches on a painting before I leave. Before he left though, Schneeisel called out to him, Clovis, how do you intend to solve this chess problem that he left for you? With the usual tactics, Clovis answered, I hate the 11s for having let Lelich die, but hearing he had a friend among them, perhaps I'll need to show some leniency. Don't let your feelings make you soft, we have to subdue them. It was easy to see Cornelia's ire, despite her calm tone and volume. There are times a ruler has to be firm, Clovis, Schneeisel chastised, even treacherous. A soft heart is not a virtue, not for someone who stands at the top. I appreciate your advice, Clovis said, heading for the door to go inside, watch and see how I handle it. That land is Lelich's final resting place. I want to make it as quiet for him as I can. He then entered the door and closed it behind him, leaving Yuffie, Cornelia and Schneeisel to their own devices. As Schneeisel had mentioned, Area 11 was mobilizing resistance. The victory of the famous Todo of Miracles swept through the country in small murmurs as well as word that he had survived the war. The country was down on its luck for the most part, but Todo's survival and words of a Japanese liberation front spread across the numbers like a raging storm. On top of that, former residents of Karakura town brought news of resistance super soldiers that had fought in the war. It was considered a fairy tale at first, but given more form by a band called the Fullbringers. It was ironic that underneath Britannia's harsh reign that Kigo had finally caught a break. Britannia refused to let the official word be that the Karakura 7 had ever existed, but that didn't mean Kigo couldn't sing about it, not to mention it was never given an official name due to the cover-up. Kigo's songs made it a little bit easier for Japanese children to sleep at night. Many people took it as just the lyrics at face value, never seeing the underlying meaning, but for those who fought for Japan's future, they could see it. They didn't know Kigo was actually one of the 7, but they understood his message: keep fighting and never surrender. If just 7 really strong people could hold out against Britannia like that, imagine what a large mobilized army, standing on Britannia's level, could do. Implausible, perhaps, but the idea was appealing and it motivated several pockets of resistance. As Tatsuki had instructed, she and the others had taken positions within the community to keep a close eye on where they believed they might find the living Lelich or attract his dead counterpart, the one they were accustomed to. Kigo and Chad were part of the band Kigo had formed with Chad on drums and Kigo the lead guitarist and singer. Kigo and named his band the Six Fullbringers. While they weren't made of actual Fullbringers, they did have 6 members, 1 drummer, Chad, a lead guitarist and singer, Kigo, a backup guitarist, a pianist, a bass guitarist and a saxophonist. To disguise themselves, Chad wore a blonde wig on stage and kept his head covered all other times, even during the summer. Kigo, to hide his identity, dyed his hair black and wore colored contacts and changed his name to Jinjo Kyujo in memory of a man he still considered a friend. Uryu, after green-lighting it with his friends, knowing the prejudice he would face, became a lawyer and an honorary Brightonian. Becoming an honorary Brightonian was the only way to get into the law system. True, Uryu wanted to take up medicine again, but was afraid he might be tracked back if people saw him in action. Uryu falsified his background, passing off that all of his contacts and references had been killed during the war, and when fingerprinting came he used spiritual pressure to change the readout on his fingerprints. Uryu spent 2 years learning Brightonian law and was glad that Britannia was so lax in their security systems for the honorary Brightonian system, to a degree. Also, in preparation for becoming an honorary Brightonian, Uryu learned an old Quincy technique called Silberzunge, silver tongue. The technique only worked on the non-spiritually aware, and it let any Quincy that used it alter the target's brain waves by using the user's Ryotsu to change the target's brain patterns to accept what he or she is telling them or persuade them to do something. It could only be used for simple argumentative commands and could only be used to accept the user's point of view. For example, a Quincy could persuade a target to want to give them something they were holding, but could not command them to shoot another human being. To complete his identity concealment, Uryu started wearing contact lenses, cut his hair to the point where it didn't go past his ears, and changed his given name. Uryu's surname was incredibly common, so a change in given name was all that was needed. He took the name Soken, after his grandfather, as a way of letting only one man know, if he cared, that he was still alive, his father. Uryu may not have liked his father much, but even Uryu knew that no parent should have to outlive their child, and he could only imagine what Hine had to be going through. But Tatsuki said that she would bring the bad news. Tatsuki didn't bother getting a job or ingratiating herself into society. She instead pillaged some abandoned retail stores for clothing to make herself easy to get lost in a crowd. She was the leader now, and so she felt it was her job to keep it all together. She also felt it would be easier this way for her to seek out a Soul Reaper representative if she didn't have a role to fulfill. She had confirmed the locations of all of her friends, except for Orium. Wherever the former bakery shop owner was, Tatsuki had yet to locate her, but she was alive. Tatsuki could faintly sense her best friend's presence no matter where the girl was, so long as Orium remained within a 500 kilometers radius. Without Ryotsu, she had yet to complete her secondary objective of finding Hine, Yazu, and or Karen and letting them know the bad news. Right now, she was watching Kigo up on stage. She couldn't believe that the man rocking it out on stage had once been the dorkiest man in her high school class. All of Kigo's songs pertained a little bit to what happened during the war and his experience as a Fullbringer. They were his inspiration for his music and the influence to motivate him. And he said, "Don't stop me, I'm gonna with this for us. Don't worry, I'm not gonna give up. Whatever happens, I just want you to know." There was a beat before Kigo finished the line with, "that there will always be hope." Kigo then broke out into a guitar solo and continued to jam, and all of the people around began jumping around, cheering and screaming. Tatsuki smiled and then looked up at the night sky. "It's amazing how life still goes on without you." Tatsuki blinked. She remembered all the good times she and Ichigo had shared, as children, as teenagers, as young adults, all throughout their adventures with the Soul Society. Tatsuki's anguished eyes then betrayed her smile. She ran her hand through her hair. Tears dripped from her eyes. Despite it being 3 years, the pain remained. Why did you have to die? Tatsuki wondered. She had traveled with Orium all over Karakura town in search of Ichigo. They found liters of his blood along a slab of concrete. It had his Ryotsu. Tatsuki saw a blood trail that led slightly away from the site, but it was a dead end. From the path of the blood and how abruptly it ended, Tatsuki determined that Ichigo had gotten up, perhaps after the attack was over, tried to make his way back and died. Orium wasn't convinced. If Ichigo was really gone, she thought there would be a blood stain on the ground or an impact where his body hit the ground, or at the very least they would find his substitute badge somewhere or his broken Zanpakuto. Tatsuki couldn't confirm such, but she wasn't the greatest at sensing Ryotsu. Urayu had long since given up on the search by this point, and by the time Tatsuki had found him the blood and Ryotsu had vanished by the rain and time respectively, so it was impossible to know. Orium remained ever tenacious in her belief that Ichigo was still alive and, despite Tatsuki's attempts to deter her, Orium remained hopeful. Tatsuki couldn't understand why Orium remained so insistent that Ichigo would still be around, but Tatsuki never was able to understand her best friend all of the time. Tatsuki wished she had Orium's level of optimism, but for Tatsuki she couldn't remain so firm in that belief. It had been 3 years, she figured that Ichigo would come to see them at least once if he was alive. Suddenly I'm not in such a festive mood. Tatsuki left the area where Kigo's band was playing and went out into the woods behind the stands. She sat underneath a tree and brought her knees up by her chest and bent her head down and cried. She wasn't crying just because of Ichigo. Tatsuki had these little episodes of grief every now and then. Besides just her best friend, Tatsuki didn't even know if her parents had survived the war, and they didn't even know if she was alive, or if Britannia had put a bounty out for her, executed them on principle, and Tatsuki was too scared to even go home. She was alone in the world, all she had were her friends, but night in and night out, all she had was herself. Even Chizuru would be a welcome companion at this point. Tatsuki turned over and curled into a fetal position. She was about to fall asleep when she had the feeling that someone was watching her. She turned over only to see, for a split second, saw a hooded figure standing between her and the moonlight, but it was gone before she could even get a good look. There was a trace of Ryotsu left behind, but it was far too faint for Tatsuki to get a good read on it. She thought of one possibility, especially since the Ryotsu seemed familiar in a way, but Tatsuki smiled a stupid grin. Don't be an idiot, there's no way it could have been him. Your mind is playing tricks on you. You have to face the facts. Facts. The last word lingered on her mind for a little longer. Orium, do you really think he's out there? Tatsuki looked up at the moon, or is the idea of believing he's still around your way of coping with it all? Tatsuki frowned at the idea that her friend might be suffering from mental instability. Orium, please be careful. End of chapter 151. Chapter 152, Cornelia vs Guinevere, Political Warfare. Spring 2014 ATB. Cornelia was reporting to her post and meet with General Darlton about what he explained as something important. When Cornelia arrived, Darlton was not alone. Am I interrupting anything, General? She asked, saluting. Darlton motioned for Cornelia to put her hand down. Not at all, this is the reason I called you here, Darlton stated. He gestured to the man beside him in uniform. The man was Cornelia's age, with short, black hair with blue eyes and bifocals. This is Gilbert G. Guilford. By order of your father, he'll be your personal knight starting today. Cornelia became cross. I'm more than capable of taking care of myself. Watch your anger, Major General, Darlton said crossly. Would you go against a direct order from His Majesty? Humph, Cornelia snorted, folding her arms. I'll leave you two to get acquainted, Darlton said and left, leaving Cornelia and Guilford alone. Well? Cornelia glared. Don't you have something to say? All right, Guilford hesitated and saluted. Chief Warrant Officer Gilbert G. P. Guilford reporting for duty, ma'am. Special assignment to protect you, my princess. Cornelia took a slow deep breath, but did so in a way that didn't make it obvious. Her boots clacked along the tile floor as she approached Guilford. She held up a finger. "Let's get one thing straight here," she spoke authoritatively. "You're only here because my father assigned you to my guard. I don't need you to be at my back or taking care of me like I'm a helpless damsel in distress. I didn't make Major General on a whim. I'm here through more than a decade of military training and experience. Am I understood?" "Yes, Your Highness," Guilford exclaimed. "Do you understand your place here? You are at my beck and call. You are not my bodyguard, but my subordinate. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Highness," Guilford repeated with more enthusiasm than last time. "Good then. Follow me to my office. Let's see if I can't find anything to test out your capabilities." "Yes, Your Highness." Cornelia palmed her eye as she turned around. This is going to be a long day. In her office, Guilford stood by with the utmost resilience and patience, not moving for an instant, like a guard of Charles's royal palace, as Cornelia sifted through papers and reports. The second princess finally found something worth taking note of. "I wonder why I didn't notice this one sooner." She tucked the paper away into her pocket and motioned Guilford to follow her. "Come, my knight," Cornelia said, sarcastically straining the last two words. "We're going to the Air Force Base to make a visit to Area 14. Apparently stragglers of the Inked Alliance have been spotted there." "Yes, Your Highness." Area 14. Cornelia and Guilford touched down at the Viceroy Palace. Cornelia had her custom nightmare frame brought along for the ride and Guilford had his Sutherland that he was assigned brought as well. The Sutherlands were not in mass production, but some existed and Charles had Guilford to be given one upon being assigned as Cornelia's knight. Cornelia had never met the Viceroy of Area 14, nor did she know who was assigned. If she had known in advance, things would have gone a little bit differently. However, the Viceroy had specifically requested Cornelia by name to eliminate members of what she believed to be remnants of the Inked Alliance. The Viceroy of Area 14 had requested that Cornelia be sent to deal with the straggler threat. The soldiers she had currently searching for the stragglers were inadequate at hunting them down and therefore she had requested that someone with experience in fighting the Inked Alliance be deployed to her. When Cornelia was allowed access to the Viceroy's office, she waltzed in and saw a platinum blonde sitting behind the desk with a tall collar and long cream lavender dress with large amounts of cleavage. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." The Viceroy smirked and chuckled from behind her desk. "Sister, what an unexpected pleasure. Even though it's not." Deep breaths Cornelia. "Guinevere," she scowled, "what are you doing here? Where's the Viceroy?" "I am the Viceroy," Guinevere said haughtily and pointed to the gilded name plaque at the front of her desk that read, "Viceroy Guinevere sub Britannia," in sapphire lettering. "Who did you blow to get this position?" "Your Highness." Guilford was astounded by Cornelia's remark. "Oh, I'm sorry," Cornelia shot back sarcastically, "I'm usually far more professional than this." The corner of her lip twitched. "I just tend to lose my composure in family business." Guinevere chuckled. "I could have you thrown out of here for a remark like that. After all, you're in my territory, Cornelia." Guinevere stretched forward her arms and cracked her knuckles. "But I won't." She bent her elbows and rested her chin on the backs of her hands. "I'll take the higher ground and focus on our mutual enemy." "You stuck-up arrogant bitch." Cornelia mentally punctuated the last three words. Guinevere opened her desk drawer and handed Cornelia a rolled-up, large piece of parchment. "This is a map of the area where the Alliance has been spotted along with a map of the entire area itself. You are to investigate the spot on the smaller map encircled in red where we've had reports of Inked Alliance activity." "Very well," Cornelia said, taking the map and immediately about face. She couldn't bear to spend one more second in Guinevere's office. "Let's go, Guilford." "Right, yes my princess," Guilford said and then about face to bow to Guinevere. "It was nice meeting you, Your Highness. The feeling is mutual. If you get bored hanging around with Miss Hardcase and need someone a little softer," Guinevere said, purring the last word as she slumped to one side, "I would gladly welcome such a fine gentleman as yourself." Guilford blushed. Guilford." Cornelia called from the hallway. "I have to go," the warrant officer said quickly and followed Cornelia out of the building. At the scene of the designated area, Cornelia and Guilford made their way onto the scene using their nightmare frames. Cornelia's fact sphere and thermal imaging wasn't picking up any signs of life within the ghetto. Guilford, give me a map reading. Is this the right place? Yes, my princess, we are standing in the center of the red circle on your sister's map. Something isn't right here. I don't like this. I want you to circle the circumference from the northernmost point, Guilford. Circle in towards the center, clockwise. I'll move counterclockwise from the center. Yes, Your Highness. Guilford took off. Well, he certainly has the loyalty aspect down. Cornelia thought to herself. Father picks well in that regard. Cornelia slowly drove her nightmare around, looking for signs of life and movement. I don't see a damn thing. I'm not picking up any readings. Are there really Inked Alliance stragglers around here? If Cornelia had her eye on more than just the enemy, she would have noticed when she accidentally ran a tripwire along a ground that was coated with gunpowder, which erupted and made to damage her nightmare frame, but did little much other than scratch the paint. From out of the inferno, Cornelia locked and loaded and began gleefully shooting all around her. Buildings began to be demolished and finally Cornelia flushed out her enemy. They were covered in mud, which explained her inability to catch them with thermal imaging. They began making a break for the southern part of the area. Damn, Cornelia cussed and radioed for Guilford. Guilford, they're headed south, follow up on me. Yes, Your Highness. Cornelia chased after her enemy while unloading bullet after bullet from her nightmare frame's assault rifle. Run. Run, you miserable bastards. Cornelia shouted with a crazed smile. She began tagging them left and right. Enemies that weren't fast enough became roadkill and more Alliance soldiers began making their way into the Brighton-occupied part of the area. Grenades were lobbed from buildings at her nightmare frame, doing minimal damage to the reinforced plating used to construct it. Cornelia shot and destroyed anything she could spot. Her Harkins ripped and tore through buildings better than any chainsaw, and her assault rifle was bringing Alliance soldiers to their deaths quicker than a harvest boutique would sell out of caramel apples on festival night. Cornelia kept up the crazed smile and manic laughter, thoroughly enjoying butchering her enemies. A couple of enemies climbed into a nearby vehicle and she blew it up with a Harkin. Ignoring Guilford's attempts to contact her, her brain pulsing with adrenaline, Cornelia continued to shoot, kill, fire her Harkins, and demolish things with her lance until everything around her lay in ruins. She saw one man run away from behind a parked car and with a fire from her Harkins to the fuel tank, he was destroyed along with the car. Cornelia looked at everything while chuckling and smiling with a crazed look. Dead, ah ha ha, everything's dead, she laughed nervously. Princess Cornelia, please respond. Guilford. Cornelia asked as she picked up the receiver with a mildly flirty voice. Major General, what have you done? I've just destroyed all the threats. What's the matter, Guilford? Are your eyes blind? Look at the damage you've caused. What are you talking about? Cornelia chuckled, taking a look at the scene. I haven't done anything. She stopped and then saw what Guilford was talking about. She was in a Brighton settlement and everything was either on fire or in ruins. Some of the dead bodies weren't even Alliance soldiers. I tried to get you to stop, but you were ignoring my transmissions. Cornelia continued to look at the scene in wide-eyed horror. Daddy, please wake up, Daddy. A little girl shouted to her father. My son, my soon. A grieving mother cried out. Sis, it's gonna be okay, you'll live. Oh God, sis. Hoop. 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 A car alarm sounded. Your Highness. Guilford was concerned for the fact that Cornelia wasn't saying anything back. She dropped the receiver and let it sway back and forth underneath the dashboard by her knees. Her other hand let go of the left arm controls and the gun lowered at her side. What have I done? She looked at the palms of her trembling hands. I did all of this? But I'm... More cries of grieving families and the sounds of death could be heard out in the streets. Who am I? What was I doing? What have I become? I. Cornelia shut her eyes, clenched her hands to her thighs and let out a high-pitched, horrified, Anguished scream. Princess Cornelia! Guilford exclaimed, worried for her. Immediately he made a call to home base immediately. Yes. General Darlton, this is Warrant Officer Gilbert G.P. Guilford, Princess Cornelia's personal knight. Something's happened, sir, and I don't know what to do. Calm yourself, soldier, just explain to me calmly what's going on, if that's possible. Guilford nodded. I can do that. Cornelia sat in her cockpit, holding her body, trembling. Her face was one of utter horrified shock. What have I done? Those people are civilians of Britannia. I killed them all. Oh God, Cornelia's eyes welled with tears. What sort of monster have I let myself be turned into? An airship arrived to investigate the situation and find out what happened based upon Guilford's report to Darlton. While the investigation went on, Cornelia sat on a crate with a cup of hot tea and a blanket. Though it was spring in Britannia, the temperatures were like autumn down in the southern hemisphere. Cornelia was shivering, but her trembling was caused more by the experience than the temperature. She hadn't even taken a sip of tea when the soldiers approached her. Based on initial findings, they were requested to restrain Cornelia and escort her into the airship to be taken back to Britannia. If Cornelia wasn't in such a state of shock, she could have told the soldiers to let her go and unhand her as they lifted her to her feet and roughly bound her hands behind her back. Being a princess of Britannia, Cornelia had immunity to such things and could stand above the law, but she kept quiet. Despite this, the soldiers should have known the laws of the hierarchy, but they had their orders, which Guilford questioned. You can't do this. She's a princess of Britannia. He shouted. Our orders come from First Princess and Viceroy of Area 14, Guinevere sub Britannia, and are backed up by General-in-Chief Albert Q. Anardis. We are returning the second princess to Britannia and out of the area on the grounds that she may be a threat to the Empire. This case is to be brought before His Majesty the Emperor, and if he determines her to be a threat, she will receive punishment. Princess Cornelia is a loyal soldier to His Majesty and the Empire of Britannia. She would never do this on purpose. There has to be some sort of mistake. Shut your mouth. The outcry came not from a guard, but from Cornelia herself. Guilford looked over the guards restraining him at the princess herself. Her ankles were shackled together and her arms were tied behind her back with the same type of cloth used to create straitjackets. You don't understand a thing about me. I did this, and I will accept my punishment. I won't let you. I'm your knight. Then you should consider finding yourself someone else to protect. I don't need your protection. I never did. This is my mistake and I will face the consequences. Cornelia was not about to hide behind her status, though she very well should have been able to, even given the circumstances. Although Guinevere stood above her in hierarchy given the first princess' political position and higher claim to the throne, Cornelia was still a princess of Britannia in her own right. It was doubtful anything would go past an investigation stage or any punishment would stick. You don't have to do this. I'll call Prince Schneeisel. We'll get you out of this. Don't you dare. Cornelia's outburst was louder than before. She glared over at Guilford. I am a princess of the Empire, but I will not be treated as one. I killed innocent people, Guilford, whether I meant to or not. I will not hide behind my status and dodge the law. If she understood politics better, Cornelia would know that her status as a princess would overwrite her status as a soldier, despite her actions. If Cornelia really wanted to be punished or have her arrest stick, she would have to adamantly revoke her immunity, and that would not be easy, mostly because it was practically unheard of. With a forlorn face and a suffering smile, Cornelia said more calmly. It's not justice for me to not face punishment for these innocent lives that I have stolen. I must take responsibility. But Cornelia returned to glaring. I still have standing power over you until my punishment is decided. She turned her head away from Guilford. If you continue to argue, I will have you cast out from the Britannian army. Guilford hung his head and clapped his arms and legs together. I understand, Your Highness, forgive my rudeness. Cornelia turned her head further away from Guilford and towards the aircraft that would take her back to the mainland. Take me away. As she walked forward, Guilford saw it. From the light reflected upon the sun as she walked up the ramp into the ship, Guilford could see a single tear fall from Cornelia's eyes, though they were hidden from view by her long violet hair. Guilford could see that the princess was not only traumatized by the events that had transpired, but also, deep down, she was suffering. She was having a battle inside herself. There was a demon within her body that Cornelia was trying to subdue, and she wanted it taken off the face of the earth, even if it meant going to her grave. Aboard the ship, Cornelia was placed in a holding cell and not given free access to the ship. She was also gagged so that she did not try to bite her tongue or attempt to escape using her mouth. She was a clever woman and no chances were to be taken. Once she was locked in, after the ship had taken off, about a half an hour passed before Cornelia was visited. On board the ship was the last person she wanted to see in such a sorry state, Guinevere. The viceroy was personally escorting her younger half-sister back to the mainland with the arrest of her that she had made. Her sub-viceroy could maintain the office, she believed, until she returned. My, how the mighty have fallen, Guinevere smiled with such devious delight as she held one hand against her hip. You've really dug yourself into a hole this time, sister. I always wondered how it would be possible to grind you beneath my heel. Normally a viceroy position isn't really my cup of tea. I prefer not to get mixed up into messy politics, but that doesn't mean I don't have the skill. A viceroy position was perfect for my plan to drag you down before me. When I heard about your mental instability, I asked the General-in-Chief for assistance to see if there was a way of exposing it. Of course, I didn't think you'd fall for the bait hook, line, and sinker. Although Guinevere was not a member of the military, as first princess she had her contacts and many friends in high places, not to mention many consorts. On top of that, her silver tongue always helped her squeeze just a little extra information out of people she chatted with. You and I might be members of the royal family, but a threat of the empire is still a threat of the empire, and threats will always be eliminated. If I can prove you are dangerous, you will be executed without a second thought. I heard earlier, you want to face punishment so badly, Guinevere smirked. Consider your immunity status willingly revoked. You conniving bitch. You set me up. Guinevere continued to go on about her little revenge plot. The men you killed, they were convicts that the General-in-Chief had relinquished into his custody, all for this little test. Guinevere was enjoying rubbing the state of affairs in Cornelia's face so much she didn't realize how much vital information she was giving Cornelia, assuming she would remain in the army after this whole ordeal. Even if Cornelia didn't face corporal punishment or jail time, she might be ejected from the army to save face if politics considered such a tact to be optimal. Cornelia spoke into the scarf, forgetting that it was pointless. What does the General-in-Chief have to do with this? What are you up to? Guinevere, why would you do this? What's that? Guinevere held her hand to her ear. I'm afraid I can't hear you. Oh, Guinevere leaned back and folded her arms over her bust. That's right. A devious smirk crossed Guinevere's lips. You've been declared extremely violent and dangerous, so you can't use your mouth or your limbs. Her expression switched back to one of pondering. I wonder what might happen to your little sister. Even if you aren't executed for what you've done, I wonder if people would consider it okay to let her stay with such a mentally unstable sister. The devious smirk returned. She'll be deported just like Lelich. You fucking cutthroat whore. Cornelia did her best to stand up and leapt at Guinevere, only to bang against the electromagnetic barrier keeping her in. She was repelled backwards and hit her head on the floor. Tears welled up in her eyes, not because of the pain, but because she had let Guinevere get under her skin and her sudden outburst was not helping her case. Goodness, Guinevere openly feigned concern with babyish-sounding sarcasm. Are you all right, Cornelia? She sneered and put her hand underneath her chin, rubbing the back of it slowly along her smooth skin. That's a good look on you though, Cornelia. She laughed, that irritating, evil-sounding chortle of hers. Down on the ground, bound and tied up, helpless and weak, like your mother wanted you to be. She laughed a little more. Cornelia sat up and scowled at Guinevere. Don't you dare drag my mother into this. Oh no, I'm so scared of you when you're tied up and behind an electromagnetic fence, Guinevere said, feigning fear this time in the way she had feigned concern before. Whatever shall I do? Guinevere, Cornelia scowled, punctuating and slurring the syllables of her sister's name. I'd love to stay and chat, but I have better things to do on this ship than rub it in your face about how I've finally gotten my revenge on you for how you've humiliated me. Ta-ta, Cornelia. I'll be sure to say that you're a raging lunatic for the official record in front of His Majesty. See you at your execution date. Even with her immunity status revoked, the only authority Cornelia would answer to for such a thing would be her father, the Emperor. Guinevere was convinced that she had the evidence and the standing to persuade her father that Cornelia was a danger to the Empire and have her legally executed for her crimes against the country. Whether or not this was reality or fantasy remained to be seen, but the possibility still existed, however small. It was likely, though, that Guinevere was just saying it as a smug remark, an ill-mannered joke, to demoralize the second princess. She was no political genius, but even she would know better that the best she could hope to do would be to destroy Cornelia's image in the public eye. Cornelia let go of her hate a few moments later and just looked depressed. Yes, executed, I could be executed for this. If Cornelia was thinking clearly, she'd realize how small that possibility was. The worst she could be looking at, under the circumstances, was maybe discharge from the army or excommunication from the Empire. Execution, though possible, was wholly unlikely. However, between her depressed mental state and Guinevere's haughty attitude, it was hard for Cornelia not to harp on the worst-case scenario. Her thoughts quickly shifted to Guinevere's motive. But why would she do this? She can't still be bitter about the whole horse race, can she? No, I guess this is her way of revenge from that time. Cornelia remembered when she beat her older sister halfway to death and permanent brain damage. Guinevere certainly hadn't forgotten that, considering Cornelia clearly could recall every second of it. But what's the General-in-Chief got to do with all this? Was my mental state really that noticeable to him? Was that, Cornelia's expression turned forlorn, why father assigned me a knight? Upon touchdown, Guinevere went to go fill out some paperwork, one of which was stating that Cornelia had willingly temporarily revoked her immunity as it couldn't be permanently revoked without Cornelia being excommunicated from the royal family, which couldn't happen unless that was decided as her punishment before charting a private flight back to Area 14. Cornelia, meanwhile, was to be brought to another holding cell within the barracks and be kept under the watchful eye of the men she used to order around. With her immunity status revoked, she could be treated like just any other soldier. However, while that had sounded appealing at the start, Cornelia now had mixed feelings about the whole thing. On one hand, this was justice. Cornelia should rightfully face punishment for her actions. On the other hand, there was no telling what could happen to her without her status to hide behind. She very well could have put Yuffie's welfare in danger as well as her own, and it took her conniving older sister to remind her of that. And on the subject of Guinevere, Cornelia couldn't help but feel angered that she had fallen into a trap set up by the first princess. On a personal level, Cornelia wanted Guinevere to suffer the consequences of what had transpired and not her. It was too late now though, Cornelia figured. As head of her house branch, and repealing her immunity status for the incident, Cornelia had no one to hide behind. Guinevere was not only a royal family member, but a viceroy. Only Odysseus and Schneeisel could even attempt to overturn Guinevere's authority if her own father didn't step in. The former Cornelia hardly saw, and the latter may not help given the black mark it would put on his own career for helping a murderer. Cornelia wasn't about to count on her own father for anything, since he encouraged infighting between siblings and any chance they could take to make them look a more likely candidate for the throne or lower another's standards he admired greatly. Clovis was the only other sibling Cornelia could count on to the same level as Schneeisel, since none of her other siblings would think of coming to her aid, but Clovis was such a poor politician that, if he tried, Guinevere would chew him up and spit him out from the clack of the gavel. Cornelia hated to admit it, but while her older sister was not the most proactive member of the royal family, she certainly was very talented in both politics and manipulation. In fact, that was yet another reason Cornelia couldn't stand her older sister. Guinevere had the skill to assist the empire, but only ever used her skills for personal gain. Even her term as viceroy was only so she could get revenge on her. Outside her siblings, Cornelia's other saving grace was her good status with General Darlton and, under the circumstances, Major General Meredith Myrdia. Normally Meredith would not be a viable option since she and Cornelia currently held the same rank, but given the circumstances neither one could help her now. As Guinevere had told her, assuming she wasn't bluffing. Though Cornelia had never known her older sister to boast what wasn't true. Typically she boasted what was true, and that's what made her strutting infuriating. Enardas was also in on the setup, and his authority was being added to hers to put her in this state of affairs. Cornelia had no way out and no one to hide behind. Under the circumstances, it was bittersweet. Or so she thought. There was, in fact, one person that Cornelia had no counted on coming to her aid. And as she and the two soldiers escorting her entered the foyer of the barracks, Cornelia's eyes widened with shock. Standing tall, proud, and giving a glare, on the mat that contained the Brighton Neon Army emblem, there was a lanky, slim, dirty blonde, blue-eyed woman about a decade older than Cornelia. She was wearing a regal, purple cape, and a form-fitting white jacket over a black shirt with white pants, black, knee-high boots, and elbow-length black gloves. Her arms were folded across her narrow abdomen. Nonette. As Cornelia was forced to her knees as the soldiers nearby her dropped down as well, Cornelia realized that she could be saved. The members of the Knights of the Round superseded the authority of the military. Unless another Knight of the Round with a lower number took Guinevere's side, which was doubtful, else Nonette would not be standing here, Cornelia figured. As the Knight of 9, Nonette could save her. However, based on the scowl upon her face, Cornelia didn't know if Nonette was there to help her, or chew her out. Her best friend was unpredictable to a degree, and if Nonette was about to take out her wrath on Cornelia, the second princess feared that it would be worse than any punishment the Empire could deal her. Cornelia gulped, praying for an aversion to the worst-case scenario. Miss Enneagram, the voice of one of the soldiers trembled. We did not know you were arriving. What can we do for you? You can start by turning the Major General over to me. Cornelia reacted with a small, nasal gasp. Nonette was on her side. But she is to be confined until. The response was met by Nonette slamming her foot into the man's neck from behind and smashing his head into the floor with her foot. I am in a very bad mood right now, understand? As a Knight of the Round I have the authority above the General-in-Chief, and I am ordering you to turn the accused of Cornelia Le Britannia over to me. She put more pressure on the man's head. Is that clear? Nonette asked darkly. We understand, Miss Enneagram. The other soldier holding on to Cornelia released her and scuttled away like a crab. Please take her. Nonette walked over to Cornelia's front and yanked her to her feet by the collar. Cornelia could see the look of disappointment in Nonette's face as the knight's cold, stoic eyes burned into Cornelia's soul. Cornelia shook with fear. She had always feared her much older friend for reasons like this. When Nonette was mad, her very stare could send shivers down her spine, as it was doing now. Cornelia had the sudden urge to lose control of her bladder, but she squelched it. Nonette then let go of Cornelia only to walk behind her and grab her collar from behind, causing Cornelia to stumble as she lost her balance. Cornelia was forced to walk backwards as best she could as Nonette took her outside. Twice she fell. The first time Nonette picked her up and led Cornelia forward, allowing the second princess to walk normally, but Nonette's brisk pace caused Cornelia to stumble again. After that time, Nonette gave Cornelia her hand to help her back to her feet, only to then drag Cornelia by a lock of her hair the rest of the walk. She walked over to a car and opened the back door. Get in, she said to Cornelia. Cornelia hurriedly got in the car and Nonette buckled in the second princess, since she would have found it next to impossible with the restraints binding her hands behind her back. Nonette slammed the door shut, causing Cornelia to wince as she further recognized her friend's anger. Nonette then got in the driver's seat and drove to her destination, the Enneagram estate. Once inside, Nonette got Cornelia out of the car and this time walked behind the second princess, bending Cornelia over with one hand behind her head and the other pushing on her back, and led the second princess to the front steps. She held onto Cornelia's collar as she opened the front door. The maid bowed to her at the foyer. It's nice to see you have returned, mistress. I don't need anything, Nonette said, knowing how her maid would follow up her greeting. Understood, mistress. Call upon me if you change your mind. Nonette then led Cornelia up the stairs and into her bedroom. Once inside she closed and then locked the door. Sit. Nonette's authoritative voice had Cornelia's legs given and Cornelia just dropped to the floor on her ass. Nonette went over to the bookshelf of her extravagant bedroom, containing a skylight, A bookshelf taking up an entire corner of the room and 1/4 of the 2 walls surrounding it, a queen-sized bed with several pillows, a shag blue carpet and white wallpaper with pictures of monochromatic technicolor birds and non-domestic felines all over it. It also had a small study area, desk, chair, computer, the works. Nonette took a single book of the shelf and opened to a page with a loose leaf note in it. She talked as she seemingly began to read the note. "I can't believe you would do something like that." The iron in Nonette's voice did not leave. "I'm sorry." It was the only thing Cornelia could think to say. "You're lucky I'm so high up in hierarchy, else you would have been up a creek without a paddle." "I'm sorry." I know you're probably thinking something like, "Why did she save me? I was ready to accept my punishment, status be damned." Well, honestly, I didn't even know about the situation until Guilford contacted me by phone. Guilford did what? Cornelia had specifically ordered Guilford not to do anything, so this came as quite a shock to her. "That's some tenacious knight your father assigned you," Nonette kept up her serious tone. "He climbed up the chain of command, starting with Darlton and got to me through Schneeisel, who he got to through Darlton." Schneeisel gave way authority to Nonette? Cornelia knew Schneeisel would not help directly, but the very idea that he was willing to sit on her side of the fence by giving Guilford Nonette's contact info at all meant that he cared, and that warmed Cornelia's heart. I can understand why Schneeisel wouldn't want to dirty his own hands. He has his political career to think of, and it was your older sister who had you arrested. He'd be going up against not only her, but apparently, after I hung up with Guilford, he learned and told me that the General-in-Chief is involved. So like I said, you're lucky I'm so high up." Nonette put the book back on the shelf and turned to face Cornelia. "Or else I wouldn't be able to get the story from you. What's there to say? I killed people, Nonette, innocent civilians of our race. What's there to say?" Nonette went and got her desk chair and dragged it over to sit in front of Cornelia. She crossed her legs and interlocked her fingers as she let her hands rest on her knee, all the while keeping up a serious tone with the second princess. "I don't believe you. It's the truth. The Cornelia I know would never knowingly kill innocent Brightonnians, not unless she had a good reason. And if she didn't have a good reason, she would be sorry for it. You don't know what I've been through, Nonette. I've changed since you last saw me." It had been a long time since the two had met face to face. The responsibilities of both women made it difficult for them to meet in person. "Of course you've changed. I've changed too. Change is a part of life. But no matter how much we change, there are still some things about us that will never change." Nonette pointed at Cornelia with her elbow and wrist bent, making the shape of her arm like that of a 2 or a Z if looked at from the side. "You will always be loyal to Britannia. That is an undeniable fact. You would have never committed a massacre if you had been sound of mind. I'm bailing you out, Cornelia. Don't, it's not worth it. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Of course I do." Nonette stood up and walked a few paces. "I'm saving the life of a person who's too dense to save herself. That's not what I'm talking about. What will the public think when they find out?" Slap. Nonette struck Cornelia across the face. "When have you ever cared what the public has thought of you? You are the ruthless Cornelia Lee Britannia, a major general, media-proclaimed goddess of victory and witch of Britannia. But did you ever gain your titles just to gain them? Haven't you always acted as you wanted and let the public go their way? I know that the wound that's been carved here runs deeper than the eye can see." Nonette squatted down and pushed her finger against Cornelia's chest over where the second princess' heart was. "I know that there is a splinter of pain resting upon the surface of your skin, but that splinter is part of a very jagged spear that is embedded deep within your heart, causing you immense pain, and you're doing what you can to struggle with its existence. But you don't have to struggle, Cornelia, not when there are those around that are willing to help you. It's okay to close of your heart so that you do not feel pain, but first you have to let out the pain that you are still feeling and keeping deep inside yourself. Nonette, would Lelich, Nunnally and Her Majesty want to see you like this? Don't you think they'd want you to live well without wanting to punish yourself or lose yourself to insanity? Didn't you tell me that you wanted to live for them?" Nonette's words penetrated into Cornelia and struck deep into her body. Cornelia fought the urge to break down. "Don't fight it. Let it out. After all, Nonette stopped being serious and gave Cornelia a warm smile. I'm right here, Nellie. Cornelia then wrapped her arms around Nonette and the Knight of Nine held onto her best friend as she cried. It was easy to see that Cornelia was still suffering all she had experienced in the last couple of years. She was still traumatized, despite her best efforts to come to terms with what had transpired. Nonette soothingly would run the tips of her fingers down the right side of Cornelia's back with one hand while holding onto her with the other. Nonette listened to Cornelia's anguish during her sobs. Cornelia apologized to Lelich, Nunnally and Marianne during her breakdown and asked for their forgiveness in straying from what she had promised them. Nonette stayed the entire time and helped Cornelia calm down. For Cornelia, it was comforting to know that, no matter what might happen, that Nonette would never abandon her. With Marianne gone, Nonette was the person closest to Cornelia that she had known the longest, 2 whole years more than Yuffie had lived. Nonette even reminded her of how close they were. No matter what happens, I will always be your friend, Nellie. After her breakdown, Nonette got Cornelia some time off and got her into therapy, knowing that she more than needed it. Nonette also took some time off and kept Cornelia under her supervision, whether at the Lee Britannia mansion or the Enneagram estate. Nonette knew the vulnerable exposed state Cornelia was in and didn't want to leave her alone for fear of what might happen until Cornelia was more stable. Yuffie pitched into, wanting to do everything she could to get her big sister back on her feet. In the third princess's own words, my sister is supposed to be strong and resolute. She may not smile all the time, but that's part of who she is. I want Cornelia to get better so that she can be the one looking out for me again. During her time off, Schneeisel and Nonette managed to give Cornelia a little bit of a reason to be happy. Using Cornelia's tortured mental state to their advantage, they were able to take the transpired events and played Cornelia as a victim, and that Guinevere psychologically forced Cornelia into committing the atrocity that was wrought. The campaign benefited Schneeisel, who believed that Cornelia was a better ally to have than Guinevere, not to mention that even he was not bold enough to refuse a request made by Nonette Enneagram, lest he find himself needing to sleep with the lights on for several weeks. The campaign worked fine as it stood, with photographs taken, much to Cornelia's chagrin, to get some newsprint evidence, but what really sold it was when Cornelia was convinced to make a public speech in response to Guinevere's. The first princess had made a televised speech. She stated that Cornelia was trying to twist things and play the victim when she knows full well what she did. Guinevere stood from the viewpoint that Cornelia was trying to make the public feel sorry for her and forget that she was the one that pulled the trigger by playing the blame game with Guinevere, who, as Cornelia knew when she saw the broadcast, lied through her teeth and said that she had asked Cornelia for help. She said that she had made an error, that she mistakenly believed there were Inked Alliance soldiers at large, but were nothing more than some escaped convicts, and did not think Cornelia's mental state was that bad that she would commit to what she did. With this, the fire had been lit and Cornelia was ready to fan the flames of political warfare with her older sister. What had started as a simple revenge plot in Guinevere's hopes of having Cornelia executed by their father had now turned into a battle of wits, with the first princess attempting to destroy Cornelia's public image. Cornelia was not about to take this political assault lying down, delighting Schneeisel and Nonette when the second princess declared that she wanted to make her own speech to defend herself from Guinevere's slander. Excellent, I'll get a speech crafter and we'll. There's no need for such a showy, forced manuscript, Schneeisel, Cornelia said, and stood up with the remote control in her hand as she turned off the television she had used to watch Guinevere's speech. Let me speak from the heart. Cornelia made her request in her simple, depressed tone she had been using these days, but Schneeisel could sense how invested Cornelia was in the declaration deep down by how promptly she had shot him down and by the strength in her eyes when she said it. Are you sure? If I prepare a speech, it's just going to make me look more fraudulent, which is exactly what Guinevere would expect. Just trust me, dear brother. I'll show Guinevere the type of fire she's playing with, but not knowing when to bow out her head when she had the chance. The speech was held at a private, secure location, to prevent bystanders from attacking. Schneeisel made sure the media made it clear that that was the reason the location was secure, and that Cornelia was not afraid to face the public, but simply wished to get out her words without interference. Schneeisel hadn't seen Cornelia the morning of her speech and was surprised, as were many, when the second princess entered in onto the scene with her hair straight and flat rather than in the faux curls she normally styled it. The only attempt Cornelia had made to style her hair was a horizontal braid around the sides of her head above her ears. She wasn't even wearing her soldier uniform, but rather a white and red, form-fitting outfit with a regal, white cape, and thigh-high red boots along with matching, arm-length, silk gloves. Most people quieted down when they saw this as Cornelia took to the stand. Cornelia tapped the microphone and it made a loud tone and ring before the second princess cleared her throat and began to speak. "Citizens of Britannia," she addressed the Empire, "I come before you to speak not in my defense, or to excuse my actions, but to speak out against the slander my sister throws me under." She knew full well the troubled state I was in at the time, even admitted it to my face, and lied to all of yours. I do not excuse my actions for the deaths of the innocent Britonians whose lives I took, but I will say that not a moment goes by that I don't wish I could take it all back. Cornelia looked at her palm. I was not in control of myself. Ever since the taking of Area 12 I've had these urges of destruction. She looked seriously at the public. Never did I think it would mean self-destruction of everything I've worked towards. I love Britannia, it is my home. I have worked since the mere age of 14, when I was made second lieutenant, to make this country a strong nation. I would never, knowingly and willingly, take the lives of innocents with my own two hands. Yes, I have sacrificed hostages under dire circumstances. I've even been extreme in my methods of pragmatism, causing large amounts of property damage, but those are actions I did for the greater good of Britannia. I would never destroy an entire settlement just to destroy it and specifically target and shoot my own people. I was good and ready to revoke my immunity so that justice would be done and those of you in Area 14 crying out for blood would feel satisfied. I was saved by the Knight of Nine, known at Enneagram, and though it is not the justice you all cry out for, all I can do is apologize and hope that you can forgive me. I am getting better and I hope one day I can return to the front lines and show my renewed control so that you won't have to take my word for it. And so, to all of the families who lost loved ones because of my thoughtless actions and inability to control myself, though my words are meaningless, I am truly sorry. Cornelia paused, finding it harder and harder to hold back her tears. She had wanted to get through this professionally, but she could hear the sounds of her stifled sobs reverberating through the speakers. She did her best to maintain her composure and did not break down, but all the eyes upon her saw it when tears began to roll down the cheeks of the second princess. Cornelia gave a distressed smile and said, "I have nothing further to say." She then walked off the stage, the clacking of her boots echoing as she walked away. The public was left in shock. If many weren't convinced of Cornelia's troubles, they were now. She had a reputation of always being strong-willed and stolid. To see those tears roll down her face on national Britonian television, across all areas the nation owned, a majority of the public came to her defense. Cornelia made it clear her stance on the subject and much of Britannia could see her pain. Not everyone was convinced of Cornelia's innocence and there were several who believed her tears were faked. However, these opinions belonged to a very small minority, a bunch of which in large support of Guinevere to begin with. However, the majority of the country was on the side of the second princess. Even those whose family members she had murdered could tell that she never meant for it to happen and sympathized with her. Press releases of her consistent mourning of the late Empress Marianne, whom she was close to, her mother's death, and the loss of 11th Prince Lelich and Nunnally were all used as ammunition to paint Cornelia as the victim and Guinevere as a manipulative bitch. The first princess still had her supporters, but they were dropping excessively. Cornelia's deeply rooted positive reception with the common folk of Britannia was trumping Guinevere's constant belittling of anyone not belonging to the upper class. There were even members of the upper class switching sides. Due to the turmoil, Guinevere was forced to abandon her viceroy position just to save face and gain just a little bit of sympathy, though not much, that the situation had cost Guinevere her job. With the blame shifted, Cornelia was able to play off that she had been manipulated by her evil half-sister. Under Nonet's watchful eye, and approval by her therapist, Cornelia was taken back to Area 14 for a short duration to meet with the families and offer her condolences in person. This too was thrown to the hungry media and Cornelia even made a statement that she would pay for reparations to the settlement out of her own pocket, to make sure that it was repaired properly. She even stuck around for a while as a temporary viceroy whilst the transaction was made and construction went through. As she watched the reconstruction of the mayhem she herself had caused, she waved Guilford over, who was hanging around with some other soldiers. Guilford excused himself from the group and approached Cornelia. "Yes, my princess." Without turning to face him, continuing to watch the renovations, she said, "I've been meaning to ask you something since the day it happened, but I've been forgetting. On the day Guinevere had me arrested, I gave you a direct order not to contact Schneeisel and not to help me, and yet you disobeyed me. Why?" Guilford dropped down onto one knee. "I did it for you, Your Highness. You are an inspiration to soldiers everywhere, and losing you over an incident where you are not yourself is an insult to your greatness and demoralization to all of Britannia, ma'am. I've always admired you, Major General. You were a well-known hero to me and my classmates before I even knew trigonometry. Even though it looked like you had given up on yourself, I was given the responsibility of being your knight, and I should keep you from death's door even at the cost of my very life and soul. No matter what enemy you face, even when you are your own worst enemy, I am at your back. That is my duty as your knight, Your Majesty." He paused and waited for Cornelia to say something, but when she didn't, he added, "And yet, in helping you, I went against your direct orders. I will accept whatever punishment you have for me, Your Highness." There was a long silence before Cornelia finally spoke. "In face of direct orders, you acted as you deemed best, for the sake of Britannia and its future. I would be lying if I said I would not have done the same. I cannot punish a soldier who fights for what he deems is best for Britannia." However, Cornelia turned around sharply, clacking her boots together, and spoke authoritatively to Guilford, "Disobey my orders in a combat scenario and there will be consequences. Is that understood?" Guilford swiftly rose to his feet, saluted and bellowed with pride, "Yes, Your Highness." Cornelia smiled a genuine smile at Guilford. "That will be all, Guilford my knight." "Yes, Your Highness." Guilford prepared to return to the soldiers he was chatting with. "Ah, where do you think you're going?" Guilford turned around sharply and saluted. "Ma'am, I was under the impression you had dismissed me. I apologize if you had not." "Your apology is accepted and your mistake is excused and well-founded on my words, but not on the presumption of your duty." Guilford was confused. "You're my knight, aren't you?" Cornelia asked. "Isn't it your job to stand by my side?" Guilford was beaming. "Yes, Your Highness." "Understood, my princess." As Guilford stood by Cornelia's side, watching the renovations, Cornelia looked at the sun overhead and thought to herself, "Some mistakes cannot be corrected or forgiven though, and sometimes you will lose all you have built up, but that just shows how much trust in me Britannia has. I have a long way to go on the road to recovery, but I will return to defend Britannia yet again. I won't make the same mistake twice. I am Cornelia Lee Britannia and I am the hero of the people." From that point forward, Cornelia started to see Guilford in a different light. He had started out as an unnecessary addition to her world, but now, Cornelia felt, he could be the best thing to ever happen to her. He was her knight, someone obligated to stand by her, obey, serve and protect her, even from herself and things where physical violence would not save her. But a fourth thing arose from that as well. Cornelia also saw Guilford as a companion, someone she could rely on in times of crisis to assist her in dire situations. Cornelia could recall plenty of times in her teens when such a person would have come in handy, times when Nonette wasn't always around. This all came out in therapy as Cornelia's mental state was slowly restored. Everything that was bothering Cornelia came to the surface. Cornelia's therapist was also able to get to the root of Cornelia's problems and help her overcome some of the things weighing her down, like Lelich, Nunnally, and Marianne's deaths. Her therapist also helped her come to terms and sort out her feelings towards Nonette and Marianne, further cementing Cornelia's suspicion of her bisexuality, though Cornelia seemed to have an almost fanatic preference towards Marianne whilst she was alive. And it turned out she preferred men over women. It took her about a full year for Cornelia to get her full bearings straight. Somewhere between a quarter and halfway through, Nonette felt comfortable leaving Cornelia out of her watchful eye and knew that Cornelia could take care of herself. During her routine therapy, though Cornelia was taken off active duty, she received reports from Guilford from time to time about actual Inked Alliance sightings. Cornelia had him take command in her absence, shifting Guilford out of the warrant officer regime and planting him as a brigadier general under her command, to better get respect out of her troops. Cornelia wouldn't have done it if she didn't think Guilford was capable of handling it or had the capacity to lead, so her troops respected her decision and gave Guilford the proper respect. By the fall of 2015, Cornelia was back on her feet and back on active duty. She wasn't sunshine anymore, she never would be again, but she had learned to cope with her troubles in life without being sociopathic about it. She had constructed a large emotional wall between her and the outside world as her means of coping with reality. She stayed just out of its reach so that it wouldn't hurt her as badly. However, her wall was not impenetrable. She had a few soft spots, but attempts to try and find them would have you shoved away immediately unless you were the cause of her soft spots. During her time off, and even more once back on active duty, Cornelia had come to appreciate her working relationship with Guilford a whole lot more. The two were constantly seen in each other's company, but neither actively or romantically pursued the other, despite the appearance of their relationship. Guilford's loyalty was to Cornelia without question, and Cornelia's ability to rely on that loyalty is what made her appreciate him. In the winter of 2016, Cornelia was promoted to lieutenant general and placed within the famous Glaston Knights. In the summer, after putting down insurrections within areas 7, 9, and 12 within a few weeks of each other, mostly single-handedly, and also repelling a group of Chinese Federation fanatics, which even the nation itself apologized to Britannia for, its government not having any connection to the group, Cornelia was placed upon the highest she could reach. Cornelia reached the rank of 4-star general. End of chapter 152. Chapter 153, Cornelia Story Mode, End. May 24, 2016 ATB. During her first week of her new rank, Cornelia sat in on a meeting with the other generals and the general-in-chief. The only general she recognized was Darlton. It would also be her first time meeting General-in-Chief Anardas in person. The General-in-Chief of Britannia's entire army, Albert Q. Anardas, was 72 years old and still in incredibly sturdy shape. He had a full head of shaved white hair and wore the official hat of the Britannian Army. His uniform was lined with so many shiny medals it would embarrass any rapper. He had a cigar dangling from his lip and he stood, despite his age, at 195 centimeters and weighing 110 kilograms, most of it being muscle. He had rugged stubble and a mustache. One might wonder if instead of a mustache a caterpillar wasn't experiencing its pupa phase on his face. He had an eye patch on his right eye along with a fair amount of scar tissue. It was an old war wound caused by taking part of a grenade explosion to the face and living to tell the tale, or so it was said. He sat in the big, fancy, important, red velvet, twice as big, chair at the head of the table. "Let's get down to business," he said with his cigar in his mouth. One of the generals sitting next to him reached over with a lighter and lit Anardas' cigar. Anardas exhaled the smoke and blew it up towards the ceiling. A majority of the meeting was spent going over Clovis Rain in Area 11 and how that area was experiencing a fair amount of problems. Cornelia asked if she might go over there and check it out for herself. She had finally come to terms with the bad blood in her soul between her and Japan, and not a single criminal was going to escape from the witch's spell, or so the media ragged on. However, two of the generals were convinced that while it was of some concern that Cornelia didn't need to get involved. Darlton concurred. If the situation were so dire that Clovis needed assistance, he knows Cornelia, she's only a phone call away. Indeed, Anardas said, pulling the cigar out of his mouth and rubbing it between his middle and ring knuckles. That rebel scum will not last. Britannia is a powerful nation. It won't be overturned by rebels and terrorists. Speaking of terrorists and rebels, Cornelia spoke up again. "Tell me something, Chief General Anardas, what's being done about the Inked Alliance?" Cornelia asked. "The Inked Alliance is a thing of the past, General Lee Britannia," Anardas stated. "Evans is in Russia now. If he were stirring trouble, we'd know, unless the EU wanted to start war with us." "See, that's what I thought too, but apparently Evans never arrived in Russia." "What proof do you have?" another general asked. "This," Cornelia said, drawing out something from her satchel on the back of her chair. "Guilford picked it up while we were in Area 2 after it washed up on shore." Cornelia tossed a medal onto the table. Engraved in it was Evans' name and it reeked of salt water. It also was covered in blood and chewed in a few places, most likely from wildlife. Anardas was wide-eyed, just as many of the generals were. Looks like someone showed Evans a watery grave. Someone? More like you. Anardas jumped to his feet. If it weren't for your status as princess, I would have you arrested right here. Criminal or not, you can't take justice into your own hands like that, General. Anardas had reason to believe that Cornelia was the culprit. She had found him out and everyone pretty much knew she had not forgiven the Inked Alliance for what they did to her sister. It was why none of the other generals asked the chief to calm himself. You can't prove that, now can you, General-in-Chief? Cornelia said with the utmost professionalism, fingers interlocked and elbows bent with her arms resting against the side of the table. Anardas regained his composure and sat down. Yes, well, what of it? It's possible the terrorists you encountered were just stragglers. Now see, that's what I thought as well, but they were far too coordinated to be stragglers. Ask any of my men about the encounters and you'll gather how difficult it was to eliminate them, Cornelia stated. And? What is the point you're trying to make? Anardas stated. Cornelia stood up. My point is that I believe someone in this very room is the true culprit behind the Inked Alliance. Evans was just a scapegoat. My father shares my suspicion of a traitor amongst our little table here. Criminals are not getting away from me. Cornelia then sat back down and let the meeting go on. As the meeting drolled on, Cornelia put her game face on and looked around at the different members of the community. Which one is it? She wondered to herself. Besides Darlton and me, which member is it? Cornelia was one of 10 members of the Brighton Neon military with more than a 3-star rank. Excluding herself and Darlton, that left 8 suspects, and Cornelia, not knowing them personally, couldn't trust a single one of them without further investigation. Suspect 1, Orson Orwell. His white hair was only starting to fall out. Orson was the same age as Meredith and the two of them hated each other. Their views on politics were as radically different from each other as possible. Orson believed in a nation ruled by the nobility and that the gap should widen between the commoners and nobles. Meredith believed that the nobles should use their wealth to help the public more. Their tactics also varied. Orson had rigid, by-the-book ways of thinking, while Meredith was more abstract and open-minded. Meredith was pragmatic and believed in eliminating the threat where it stood, while Orson preferred taking action after thorough investigation. Orson's motivation, Cornelia figured, would be his rivalry with Meredith, but after she was taken out the enemy changed hands and Orson needed to keep his actions secret. Suspect 2, Nathan J. Garrison. With his shiny black hair, big shiny white teeth, bleached left eyebrow and sideburns so abnormally long that they started going down his neck, amongst all the generals Nathan was widely known for his traditional way of thinking and for being not only sexist, but also incredibly racist. However, he showed incredible loyalty to Britannia, and his cruel treatment of the enemy numbers made Cornelia suspect that he would hesitate to start using them to his own benefit. Suspect 3, Matt Romero. He was a very plain-looking man with flat brown hair. He was hardly in his office because he constantly took viceroy positions whenever he could. He was also the wealthiest of the generals. His fortune rivaled even some of the branches of the royal family. He would be able to supply everyone in the alliance with the sums of money their kin kept walking away with. Suspect 4, Damien Gallant. With white hair with a lightning bolt-shaped bitch curl, while wearing rose-tinted glasses, Damien used to be the chief of police in one of Britannia's Area 1 provinces before Anardas had him brought into the military. He was hard to read and acted amiable, but many people always felt this creepy vibe from him, as though, inside, he was this terrifying monster that was a crazy serial killer and molested children. They were silly notions, and Cornelia had no idea where the people could get such slanderous ideas from. Though if he was actually guilty of treason, maybe then there were truths to the other rumors as well. Suspect 5, John Chief Masters. With a shaved head and always in the habit of wearing sunglasses, he was Britannia's greatest general. He had been in service to the army almost as long as the general-in-chief himself. In fact, he used to be the general-in-chief until a black mark on his otherwise spotless record from back in his academy days made Anardas more qualified to lead than him, which is why some people who served under him called Chief as a nickname. Cornelia suspected that such a demotion might make him bitter of Britannia and what she considered the biggest disproportionate retribution if it were the case. She'd hesitate to finger him though. Masters was building muscle since he was 7. By 14 he could pick up and throw full-grown men, and by now some citizens beefed up his ability to drawing posters of him punching a tank so hard it exploded. Could such a popular citizen actually be a cold-blooded traitor? Cornelia didn't know. Suspect 6, Joseph Brando. He was the only member of Cornelia's suspects whose hair wasn't white or dark-colored. He had blonde hair, so in desperate need of being cut, but then again the military didn't care much for shaved heads if you were brigadier or higher, since by that point you were an official badass. Brando was, to put it simply, kind of an asshole. He had no moral coding. Much unlike Cornelia, he would gladly sacrifice a hostage in order to kill the threat holding it without looking for other options first, though Cornelia herself would come to realize when such decisions would have to be made. He made the perfect soldier, but he certainly didn't make the perfect hero. His lack of care for his work ethic is what made him a suspect until Cornelia looked further into this mess. Suspect 7, Stephen Roberts. Like Masters, he too had a shaved head, but less shaven so that the remnants of his blonde hair could be seen. Stephen was the most patriotic man Britannia had ever known. He was always going on about Britannia's future, but Cornelia had 2 reasons not to buy it if he was really the man behind the alliance. Reason 1, Robert's patriotism was all a lie so that people would suspect him less. Reason 2, Robert's patriotism could drive him to extremes to have some way of eliminating terrorists. Cornelia figured that if someone was going out of their way to pay terrorists under the table, that they probably were doing it to get rid of them for the good of Britannia, or so their deranged minds would have them believe. To what end though, Cornelia could not understand. Suspect 8, the big one, General-in-Chief Albert Q. Anardas himself. Even the mighty General-in-Chief was not safe from Cornelia's suspicion. She always thought it odd how the moment anything got transferred to Black Ops that the case seemed to turn ice cold, as if the files were just stored away. If the General-in-Chief was responsible, it would explain how the Inked Alliance could so easily slip through security. The General-in-Chief controlled the entire army, no one would question him. He was like a chess player moving the pieces around the board, having control of both the black and white sides. The more Cornelia thought about it, the more she realized that, out of all of her suspects, she had the most reason to suspect the General-in-Chief. Smirking to herself, she decided that she would begin building her case and see just how much evidence made the most powerful man in the army look 100% guilty. May 25, 2016 ATB. It turned out that Cornelia had quite a lot of reason to suspect the General-in-Chief of wrongdoing. Using all the files she had at her disposal, she sat in the study and began putting together a document of all of the evidence she had to make the man look guilty. It only took her 8 hours to write off and eliminate all of her other suspects based on the evidence at her disposal. Evidence piece number 1, the Inked Alliance had been around for as long as Anardas had been General-in-Chief. Brando and Roberts were younger than Meredith, so neither of them could be the person she wanted. Evidence piece number 2, the Inked Alliance needed a large sum of cash in order to pay off the paychecks their kin were receiving. Masters had taken military because he was already that dirt poor to begin with. There was no way he could be supplying the Inked Alliance. Evidence piece number 3, the Inked Alliance was supplied with heavy-handed military tactics. Nathan Garrison was about as tactful as a schoolyard bully, preferring superior numbers to getting the job done and hoping that the objective would be one of the things crushed along his pathway. Evidence piece number 4, since the person pulling the strings was about as hard to touch as the inside of a cactus with one's bare hands, it couldn't be Orwell. He had no political power to hide behind, and he was considered to be the least liked amongst the generals. If he was pulling any sort of controversial actions, he'd be snuffed out in an instant based on the incident reports Cornelia had piled together. Evidence piece number 5, Cornelia always found it odd how much the General-in-Chief had been hands-on in dealings with the Inked Alliance. There was the incident with the tank when she was young where he forced her and her men to go after it without destroying the tank. There was when he had her and Meredith quit the case before turning the papers over to Black Ops. Cornelia couldn't help but look how, in hindsight, how odd it was to see the General-in-Chief taking such a hands-on approach. With only these 5 pieces of evidence, this left Cornelia with 3 suspects: Matt Romero, Damien Gallant and the General-in-Chief, but between the three of them she considered the General-in-Chief to be the most likely. After all, the Inked Alliance somehow knew where to hide and the outlay of even the Ares villa well enough to kill Marianne and probably force her hand into laying Cornelia off, and even know how to sneak into Cornelia's own mansion, twice, and kidnap not only Lelich, but Nunnally from underneath her nose as well. If it were Gallant or Romero, they only had control over their own troops, but Anardas had control over everyone in the military. Any order he gave could not be refuted. Cornelia began to laugh to herself as she put this all together. She should have seen it from the start. Only after having lost what made her life so blissful and having sunk to the bottom pits of despair only to bounce back up from it could she see the truth she had so easily missed. Anardas had a nice little setup having complete control of the military like he did. The only people with more authority than him were Cornelia's father and the Knights of the Round, but her father suspected him, so why did he do nothing about it? Did he not have evidence? He was the emperor, he could have anyone thrown in jail on a whim. Well, no, that wasn't exactly true. If Charles threw anyone he wanted to into prison or have them executed on a whim, he'd only further sink into the public notion of his being a tyrant, something Charles seemed like he was trying to avoid, despite the fact that Cornelia and Schneeisel could see it clear as day. That fateful phone call, where Charles had told Cornelia that he suspected a member of the army of treason, he said it because he knew that Cornelia was his only option of ever bringing Anardas down. Cornelia knew that this was her opportunity. She didn't have enough evidence for an open and shut case, but she certainly had enough of a case to warrant some investigation. However, getting Anardas investigated would prove difficult. She couldn't just go to the BLEB, Britannia Law Enforcement Bureau. Anardas was far too high up. No, she had to bring her case to the one man she knew could put Anardas in his place, the same man who had put his faith in her years ago to see it through to the end. May 29, 2016 ATB. Emperor's Villa. It took Cornelia a couple of days to be able to speak to the Emperor and find a hole in his schedule that she could exploit. Unfortunately, she wouldn't take the risk that Anardas didn't know she was meeting with him, so she was ready to exploit that possibility for all it was worth. No, not a possibility. If Anardas was as tactful as he had been up to this point, he would know that Cornelia would be meeting with Charles to confront him. He'd have to know, and he should be making a premature getaway like the spineless coward that Cornelia pegged him to be, always hiding behind his position, not having the gusto to face her head on. Cornelia didn't think so high and mighty of herself that she believed she could take Anardas on in direct combat. Her feats were nothing compared to a man so far past his prime and yet had the muscle mass to fire a .50 caliber sniper rifle with one arm, or rather that should be his mentality. In reality, Cornelia was confident that if Anardas did confront her that she could live to die another day, but he didn't, and she marked him as a coward for not doing so. Mind set on her goal, Cornelia walked into Charles's throne room only to find it vacant except for the man himself, with almost all of the lights off. The ones that were on were turned down so dimly one could mistake it for candlelight. Cornelia dropped to one knee in proper respect for her father. "Are these precautions necessary, Your Majesty? You said you wished to meet with me alone. I can only assume you have finally found the traitor I have long since suspected." "I have," Cornelia said and lifted her head up. "I have enough data on Albert Q. Anardas to warrant investigation. Can you ensure his conviction?" Cornelia felt troubled and bit her lip as she reluctantly said as she stared back at the floor, "Unfortunately, I do not have that kind of decisive evidence, sire. Most of what I have is circumstantial, nothing solid other than going off your own suspicions." However, she lifted up her head, eyes glaring. "Anardas should know that I am on to him. I have every last soldier under my command guarding my villa in some way inside and out. I have told them that if the General-in-Chief attempts to override my orders that they are to disobey even at the cost of their jobs, because I will rescind their lives if they attempt to disobey me. If their orders are overturned, then our suspicions are confirmed. If an attack is made on my villa somehow, my suspicions are confirmed. If Anardas wants to get his hands on my sister again, he will have to go through all 187,853 troops at my disposal." It was easy to see how serious of a threat she was taking the Inked Alliance now that she was convinced she knew the truth. Charles was about to respond, but Bismarck entered the hall. "Your Highness." "Bismarck, I thought I said I was meeting with my daughter alone," Charles glanced down in disappointment. I know that, sir, but General-in-Chief Anardas just attacked the Air Force compound with a large group of numbers, sir. A chord struck within Cornelia. What? Why would he expose himself like this? Charles looked at Cornelia. Get on site immediately. Bismarck, send word to General Dartlon. It is time we erase this traitor from our midst. Yes, sir. Cornelia and Bismarck stood large and tall before both exited out of the throne room and prepared to head off. Cornelia took her car parked in the front lot and drove straight for the army base to get her nightmare frame. Along the way she radioed to her troops to change tactics to send some of them after the Air Force base while still keeping her villa well protected. This was it, her enemy had exposed himself and she was going to give him hell. For Marianne, Lelich, and Yuffie this was her battle to win. But something bothered her. Why expose himself? What does he have to gain? What is he up to? This doesn't make any sense. What part of the puzzle am I missing? She arrived at base and immediately headed for the garage and began running frantically through it. She ran down the halls constantly repeating the question, "Where is it?" Until she came to a large, cream-purple, metal monstrosity, her Gloucester. Bingo! She exclaimed. She climbed into the cockpit, turned on the launch pad, exited at ground level and tore after the Air Force's sector. Anardas was flying high into the sky as Air Force troops and on-hand Inked Alliance soldiers were waging war when Cornelia arrived on the scene. The High Trader saw Cornelia and radioed her onboard computer. "Farewell, General Lee Britannia," Anardas laughed as the gigantic flying monstrosity took off. "Soon I'll be living in the cold mountains of Mother Russia never to be found." What the hell do I do? Cornelia couldn't let Anardas get away. She had to stop him. She weighed her options. She could find the nearest Air Force pilot she could find and demand to have her and her nightmare frame air-dropped onto the ship, but that would take too long. She could have the air base carrier shot down on sight, but those things would rip through regular jet planes like tissue paper and Cornelia had no authority over the Air Force itself. No matter how she looked at the situation, it was not in her favor. Either way, Anardas was going to get away and she'd have to hack into his destination and leave it to overseas allies to take care of it. However, an itch along her left thigh reminded Cornelia of yet another option. Words exchanged during Cornelia's therapy sessions entered her mind. The second princess remembered how she had worked out that her spiritual abilities brought her nothing but grief, but yet here was the best option that would give her the kind of personal revenge she needed. Cornelia laughed as though she had just heard a punchline. Who would have thought that the talent I swore to never use again would in the end be my key to revenge? Sorry, Anardas, but you're not getting away that easily. Cornelia's voice echoed from her Gloucester. She put her hand over the ejection button. Prepare to be boarded. She hit the ejection pod and then, standing up, used one of her super steps to launch herself high into the air. She was so high up that if she landed on the ground the shock would destroy her legs. That's impossible. Anardas went wide-eyed at the supernaturally high jump Cornelia had just taken. No human should be capable of a jump that high. However, he relaxed when he realized it was all for naught as he sailed higher and higher into the air and Cornelia began to descend towards the ground. And no. Cornelia felt gravity pulling her down. I'm so close. I've come too far to fail now. I have to pull myself together. If I fall from this height I will die or become paraplegic and I'm no use to anyone like that. Cornelia steeled her resolve. She found the strength within her and then stuck her legs out and felt as if she could feel like the air was solid ground as spiritual particles gathered under her feet. This is my turf, Anardas. Britannia is my home country. It is my pride. Cornelia shouted. She launched herself higher into the air, bouncing on the very open air itself. What? Anardas shouted, spewing saliva all over the monitor. As if the sky had been just another foothold, Cornelia soared higher into the air and she successfully got a higher altitude than the airship. Then sticking her legs out yet again, Cornelia pushed forward as if the air were water and went diving towards the deck of the ship and rolled forward to lessen the impact. She was on the surface and she turned towards the cabin with a glare. She pushed up off her crouched position and stood still on ship's surface, the wind blowing her hair rapidly in the breeze as the plane rose to high altitude. Cornelia had to be careful. One false step and she'd be sent flying off the base straight to her death, but these flying bases weren't meant to reach incredibly high altitudes like dogfighters or jumbo jets or passenger planes and were meant to stay low enough and slow enough to allow for walking on the surface. That, however, did not change the wind pressure or the condensation of being high up enough in the air where, even if you fell in the ocean, the fall could kill you. As the floor opened up in front of her, Cornelia could only assume that the entire base was cruising on autopilot when a large, navy blue Nightmare frame emerged from the ground. On its left arm was a wrist-mounted automatic machine gun. It had 2 chest-mounted Harkins and 2 anti-air movable shoulder-mounted ones. On the left arm was a wrist-attached long-barrel sniper attachment. It was difficult not to recognize General-in-Chief Albert Q. Anarda's personal Nightmare frame, the Malignant. Cornelia Lee Britannia. Welcome, to your doom. Anardas opened fire with his machine gun on Cornelia. The Britannian general immediately ran all over the ship trying to look for some form of cover. Luckily, the ship was built with several airfoils on the main deck for soldiers that needed to perform maintenance on the hulking piece of metal while it was in combat. The slant might have been away from Cornelia, but she managed to put decent cover between her and Anardas. She smirked again when she realized the only weapon she was armed with and held up her shotgun. Can't believe that, in the end, this is how I win. She figured that, while she was hidden from view, so long as Anardas was not firing upon her, she would try to ask a few questions. Tell me, General-in-Chief, what does a man of your status hope to gain by creating such a unit as the Inked Alliance? War unites people. Peace can never exist, and when conflict does arise the people want the lasting peace, but my organization keeps people their toes. So why try to get rid of me, kill Betty Nova, Joanne, and kidnap my sister? Cornelia asked. Warning and collateral damage, Anardas stated, you and that boy, Lelich, and your brother Schneeisel were always my greatest fears, too intuitive for your own good. I always feared you would figure it out eventually. I thought about getting rid of Darlton so you'd stop climbing, but that would put the Glaston Knights on edge. I didn't need to make the most powerful unit of soldiers in the army potentially suspicious of me when one of noblest generals of the army met an untimely fate. So you went for Lady Marianne, Cornelia scowled. We were framed for that, but I can't say that that incident didn't have its uses. Anardas didn't seem even the least bit angry about the fact that he didn't do the deed, or was framed in the least. As he just said, he was simply happy with the results. Her death left you broken, diminished. I thought you would quit. But that blasted Schneeisel stayed in your corner. He's my next target after you and your sister. Cornelia scowled. You will not harm Euphemia. She hissed. Ha ha ha. I'd like to see you try and stop me. Anardas taunted. Then, for once, you'll get what you like. Nobody harms my sister. Cornelia ran out from her concealment and fired several blasts from her weapon at the Maliagant. Her aim was off and she was too angry to activate her hyper-focus, so she was just running and shooting to the next airfoil to protect herself from Anardas' fire. I thought we had you when your sister aimed to call your mental state into question, ruining your public image, possibly having you discharged from the military. But that blasted Knight of the Round, Enneagram, just had to interfere. Guinevere isn't the only one with friends in high places, you slimy bastard. Call me whatever you want, but this is exactly what I wished to prevent. I knew that one day, you would sniff me out once you became a general. So I planned this while you did your little research. You cannot understand what you are doing. If you kill me, Britannia will not have an enemy to face, the nation will become divided, and peace will not last. Isn't this your intention too? If you try to unite the people with false peace, then it is no peace at all. If you kill innocent civilians to get the job done, you are no better than the terrorists themselves. Why do you think I was not forward with the Emperor about this? I knew he'd react just as you are now. That's why he had you sniff me out, isn't it? You're a madman. Of course he's having me take you out. Cornelia heard a pulsating sound that she recognized as the Harkin being fired. She ran straight backwards to get away from the range, but she was running with the wind, so she had to be careful not to lose her footing or go tumbling off the ship. She then circled back towards Anardas to get closer as bullets rained down upon her, which her super steps managed to keep her alive until she was able to duck behind another airfoil. Me? A madman? You're one to talk about madness, princess. Tell me, how many civilian numbers have you gleefully killed in uprisings? Men, women, and children, many of which never raised a weapon in their life? You're no different from me. We are one and the same. The numbers are not my concern. I protect Britannia, no matter the cost of worthless lives like the numbers. And how does this make you any worse than me? Ever since Japan you've become viciously racist. Do not deceive yourself by thinking that I haven't noticed this. If you didn't, you wouldn't be qualified to be the General-in-Chief, but it is the citizens of Britannia who matter. The numbers need to be taught a lesson. It is they who stole my half-brother from me. This kind of hatred is exactly why I founded the Inked Alliance. Your hatred of Britannia's enemies is the kind of thing I need, but of course, women like you have to go and make things unnecessarily complicated, which is why I use only men. You sexist bastard. Now, that doesn't mean women don't have their uses, or cannot feel hatred. You did very well as your job as the goddess of victory, no the witch of Britannia. Cornelia just growled. You strike fear into their hearts. You show that we are a supremacist nation, but you do so because of emotion that ties you to your family. You can never even hope to do what is necessary for Britannia to prosper. Like you're one to talk. Innocent people get hurt in the process of what you're doing. The Inked Alliance hates Britannia and Britannia hates the Alliance. We are natural enemies. If the men I hire die, then it's less enemies for the Empire, and if civilians die, it breeds more hatred. Why won't you see the genius behind my motives? All I see is a murderer of innocent civilians. We're back to this again. You're no different. Unlike you, I still have a heart, damn it. Cornelia ran out from underneath cover and began to head for Anardas to get underneath the Malignant as bullet fire continued to rain down upon her. She then began to climb up the metal monstrosity from behind. Anardas rocked the body back and forth to try and throw Cornelia off, but the second princess remained firm in her resolve and made for the cockpit until Anardas ejected himself from piloting the Malignant and began to run up towards the stern of the ship to head inside it. Cornelia pursued to try and shoot the traitor until she wound up running down a flight of stairs and into the ship. She continued to take well-aimed shots as she found herself trying to aim more than she wanted to get close. A heart? You act as if the organ beside your left lung means anything. You know what it does, General Lee Britannia? It makes us mortal. And mortals are very fickle and easy to kill because they have so many weaknesses. All animals have a heart. We are soldiers, not humans, Cornelia, Anardas shouted as he ran. Eventually, he pulled a gun of his own and began to fire back. Due to her slight carelessness and lack of room to move in such narrow corridors, the General-in-Chief tagged Cornelia in her shoulder. It was a low-caliber bullet and it was on the far outside of Cornelia's shoulder. The shot was a luck hit, barely penetrating the skin. Cornelia yanked out the offending projectile and, continuing to bleed, kept going like it was nothing. Wrong, Anardas, I am human and I know it because of my reason for fighting. However, the time she spent fiddling with the brass object let Anardas get ahead of her, and when she finally exited out into the garage of pilotless nightmare frames and extra aircrafts she was met with the screaming sound of a rocket headed her way and ran for the closest concealment she could find from behind the leg of a Sutherland. Ha! You think that just because you don't fight for the sake of fighting it makes you a better person than me. I do, as a matter of fact. You're wrong. You're wrong about everything you've said. The Inked Alliance will save Britannia, and make it whole. Brand me however you want, but the truth of the matter is that means and methods are nothing in the fight for justice. Justice? Cornelia shouted. You think what you're doing is justice? How dare you? Cornelia's temper flared, but she suddenly became tranquil. She focused her mind. I will show you, true justice. She said calmly. She entered out into the open and activated her hyper-focus as she ran out into the middle of the garage. A rocket came barreling towards her, but since Cornelia's perception of reality made her twice as fast as the world around her, she was able to not only duck underneath the rocket, but see the smoke from where it came from. Using a super step, she leapt towards the rocket launcher and sliced the barrel right off with her bayonet and crouched down in front of the man known as Albert Q. Anardis. He drew his pistol on her, but Cornelia already had her gun out and at the ready and sent a shotgun blast straight into the man's shoulder, tearing a hole through it, but the 72-year-old war veteran shrugged it off and his pistol fired at Cornelia's hand. Her hand recoiled from the impact, her spiritual power inadvertently taking the brunt of the impact, and the gun went flying out of her hand as she clutched her injured palm. Her weapon went cascading off the stack of crates the soldiers were standing on and fell to the ground. Cornelia then grabbed Anardis' wrist and twisted it, breaking his arm. Anardis threw a punch with his good arm, but Cornelia blocked it and moved aside before letting fly a high kick into the General-in-Chief's chin. He staggered back as Cornelia came in with a nasty left hook, but the General-in-Chief ducked under Cornelia's swing and charged forward before bashing his head into Cornelia's stomach and sending them both plummeting towards the metal floor below, with Anardis pinning Cornelia down. The second princess hit her head hard on the ground after landing on her back. Anardis switched his gun to his left arm and fired, but Cornelia rolled out of the way and, dodging another bullet as she whirled away from it, she swung a punch at Anardis, and when she saw him go to duck it, she took her knee and drove it into his abdomen, only to feel like she had just collided with a brick before she bent over backwards to avoid getting punched in the face. Cornelia dropped flat on her back and pushed her hands down up by her shoulders and kicked her legs forward like a kangaroo and sent her enemy staggering back from being kicked in the face as she sprung to her feet. With her superior speed, Cornelia then let fly a beat down of punches and kicks, too fast for Anardis to follow. She ended her flurry with a crescent kick to the face, sending the old man spinning away. Cornelia then began looking to see where her shotgun had landed, only for Anardis to begin to make a retreat. She did find her gun and opened fire, but she missed as she found herself exiting from her hyper-focus state. Normally she could hold it for a bit longer, but the blood seeping from her shoulder injury, coupled with the bruise she had taken when she fell, along with her hand injury, really were taking their toll. However, Cornelia was not about to quit. She continued to chase Anardis through the facility without end or remorse. She would get him and she would kill him. She had decided that. As she ran through the facility, she tried to pinpoint exactly where she was in relation to the outside. When she relatively figured that out, she formulated a plan. She began keeping Anardis on the run. She wanted to push him as far to the bow as she possibly could. Anardis picked up a shotgun randomly lying about in the facility to fire back at Cornelia with, but ducking usually kept her out of harm's way, except for the one time Anardis had a clear shot at her ankle. She was now running with an injured tendon in her left leg, but Cornelia didn't quit. She didn't care about the pain, all that mattered was that the eye-patch-wearing bastard she was chasing ended up dead. Eventually she reached where she needed to be, and she and Anardis exited from beneath the surface on the other side of the ship they had entered from. With a bit more pursuit, Cornelia now had it so that she had Anardis right where she wanted him. He was steps away from walking off the edge of the ship. They were over the Atlantic Ocean now, and they were really high up above sea level. As Cornelia approached Anardis, as the pathway became so narrow that he had nowhere to go except through her, the General-in-Chief unloaded his weapon into Cornelia. She jerked her head to the side as the bullets came near her face, and any and all impact towards her torso was stopped by her bulletproof vest that she was constantly in the habit of wearing. Only one bullet out of the rounds Anardis was firing at her tagged her, and that was in her left bicep. It had trouble penetrating both cloth and muscle, so Cornelia was able to just yank it out with minimal bleeding, problem, and injury. She kept her gun trained on Anardis, ready to kill, despite the discomfort in her palm and shoulder. The General-in-Chief continued to fire at Cornelia until his empty gun began clicking and he felt for his belt pouch, only to realize that he was out of bullets. "Oh, what's the matter, General?" Cornelia said, feigning concern in a light, airy voice. "Out of bullets." She stuck him with her bayonet into his chest just above his diaphragm and poised to shoot straight through his body. She scowled and spoke crossly, gritting her teeth. "Luckily for me, I still have plenty of ammunition." Anardis stared at the long gun barrel and to the woman holding it. "You must be thinking like one of your flunkies, since a single-barreled shotgun, like this one, can only carry 4 rounds in the cartridge and 1 in the barrel at a time. How many shots I've fired and how many spare stocks of ammunition I would have to have brought with me to be so certain of that statement." "Well, I'll tell you exactly what I told him. Ammunition means nothing to me." Cornelia prepared to pull the trigger. Wait, Anarda's hands went into the air. I'm worth more as a political hostage, don't you see? If you kill me now, all of my stragglers will never be found. A public execution would be worth more to your country, surely you can see that. In truth, Anardas wanted to live so he could be broken out in attempt to escape again. Cornelia seemed to fall for it as she pulled back her gun and let it rest on her shoulder as she looked to the side. The general-in-chief let out a sigh of relief. It's true, she said as she tapped the back of the gun to her injured shoulder, you are worth much more to Britannia alive. She glanced back at Anardas. However, she punctured through his clothing just below his heart and prepared to fire into his cardiovascular organ. You are done getting away from me. This isn't about politics and this isn't about Britannia. I boarded this ship for one reason and one reason alone, Cornelia said as her eyes converged in hate, revenge. Revenge? For what? Cornelia had only ever broken down due to Marianne's death, of which Anardas was not responsible for, and it was Guinevere that had almost ruined her career. He hadn't done anything worth killing him over, or so he thought. Kidnapping my sister, Cornelia spoke coldly, and that was all there was to it. She didn't care if there were more members of the Alliance somehow running about. She'd find them eventually. It'd be smoother with Anardas alive, and yes, she'd never see him put to trial or get publicly executed, but she didn't care. Guinevere got hers for trying to ruin her career, but this man, though he had not killed her idol, had committed an irredeemable sin in Cornelia's eye. I told you before, she spoke darkly and then said very slowly. No one touches my sister. The gun went off and the bullet tore through the center of Anarda's heart, rupturing the entire organ. The spiritual blast then exploded inside his body and left a huge gaping hole in his torso, taking out his left lung and several ribs along with his heart. As with Evans, the last thing Anardas saw of Cornelia was her smoking gun, and the last Cornelia saw of her victim was the shocked look on his face. From the velocity and force of the blast, Anardas was knocked off the ship and fell into his watery grave from high up into the air. When he fell out of sight, Cornelia radioed for the Army's HQ. This is General Lee Britannia, threat has been neutralized. This carrier is still headed towards Russia on autopilot, requesting pickup and destruction of craft while still over the Atlantic. Over and out. Cornelia walked back to the center of the flying ship and looked as the sun peeked through the clouds. Now it was really over. The Inked Alliance would never be heard from again. When she returned to the mainland and word got out, Cornelia was regarded a hero to her people. For her bravery and going above and beyond the call of duty, Cornelia was selected amongst the generals and promoted to General-in-Chief of the Britannian Army. She was honored and flattered to be given the position, and especially flushed when Schneeisel complimented her. While she knew she was brave, strong, tactful, and had undying loyalty to her country, she thought Darlton would have been next in line for General-in-Chief, not her. Cornelia wasn't even 30 yet, and Darlton had at least that many years of experience under his belt. I would be lying if I said that those aren't valid reasons I should take over instead of you, but you've proved before that you're a wiser field commander than I am. I will serve you loyally, my lady. Darlton then saluted to Cornelia. Make Britannia proud. I will serve you too, my princess. Guilford had knelt down at her when she spoke to Darlton about this. Lelich and Nunnally saw her promotion on the news all the way at Ashford Academy. I'm so happy for Cornelia, Nunnally smiled. Aren't you, big brother? Lelich didn't say anything and walked away. Big brother. I have nothing but indifference and scorn for that traitor, Lelich said as he left the room. Back in Britannia, after her promotion, Charles met with Cornelia one-on-one in his throne room, lights out, with only the light from the hallway of the open door giving any sort of light to the room. Cornelia knelt down on one knee to be given her orders. I am very pleased with your efforts, Cornelia. I congratulate you on your victory over that traitor Anardas. With you in control of the army, the empire shall be sustained for a very long time. Yes, your highness, Cornelia said assertively. I have your next assignment for you, Charles told her. From now on, any decisions you wish to make go through me first if they involve starting a campaign, and all of my decisions will go directly to you, my daughter, General-in-Chief Cornelia Lee Britannia. Yes, your majesty, Cornelia stated. Finally, she thought to herself, I am in a position to discover the truth. If the Inked Alliance was framed, she glanced up at Charles, there is only one man in the whole world that knows the truth about what happened. I'll play on your side for now, father, but when the time comes, and I have the evidence, be prepared to own up to the truth. I want you to go to Indonesia. It shall serve as Area 17 of our great empire, he told Cornelia. Yes, Your Highness. Cornelia declared and rose up to her feet and crossed an arm over her body. I understand. She then left her father's throne room and prepared to head out. I finished the Inked Alliance, but a new campaign is just beginning. Spirits of my ancestors as my witness, I will finish what I started and find the truth behind Mary Ann's death, and soon, father. Cornelia glanced back at the room as she walked out into the hall, and Yuffie eventually joined her at her side to leave the royal palace. I will take Britannia from you. End of chapter 153. Chapter 154, Union Story, Inu of the Resistance. Third-person POV. With Cornelia's defeat of the Inked Alliance, peace returned within Britannia, but conflict was also right around the corner. Soon Zero would rise and she would find herself once again smack in the middle of war. Cornelia didn't know it then, but the Inked Alliance was just a taste of the true tests of her skill and character that awaited her far into the future. Before she went to establish Area 17, one of her first orders of business was to promote Meredith Mirdia to the rank of 4-star general. She felt Meredith deserved it. Meredith was astounded. I am unsure how to respond, General-in-Chief. I always thought I'd always be weighed down and unable to reach higher because of what happened with Joanne. Those days are over, Meredith, Cornelia said to her. I'm in charge now and you were always good to me. You deserve this. Yes, thank you, Your Majesty. Cornelia, please, Meredith. Cornelia put up her hand. We've known each other for 10 years. You always think of yourself as a soldier first, never as a daughter of the Empire. You'll make Britannia proud, I know you will. Yes, Britannia will revere me for who I am, Cornelia said and turned to leave, and the numbers will come to fear my presence. Also, as it turned out, the rumors about Damien Gallant were true and Cornelia was forced to discharge him from the military. She placed Guilford in his place as another general. Guilford was honored. Between him, Darlton and Cornelia they would make Britannia's army into an unstoppable fighting force. Word of rebellion had spread throughout Britannia about the uprising in Area 11. It seemed as if resistance was growing more and more heated by the minute. This resistance would eventually lead to the rise of Zero and give Cornelia her greatest challenge yet. However, the tale of Zero, as he himself, as captain of Squad 10 of the GODI-13, remembers it, leaves out a few key points. Within Zero's shadow there is still a story to tell. And that story begins several years before Cornelia executed Albert Q. Anardis. Area 11. Brighton Neon Calendar 2013 ATB, 3 years after Area 11's establishment. Dressed in a lavender jacket, green tube top and grey sweatpants, a woman in her late 20s with long, blue hair wandered through the Shinjuku ghetto. She appeared to be searching for someone as her blue-grey eyes traversed the scenery of the war-torn area as she stood on top of an uprooted, slanted slab of concrete, hand up against a metal rod sticking out of the ground for balance. Such chaos and destruction, it's like it's not even Japan anymore. Are you really out here? Where are you? The woman gave a tough look. No, he promised he'd come back and I promised I would find him, and if I found proof of his demise, I would make Britannia pay. Hey! Someone called out to the woman. She prepared to conceal herself, but when she turned around and saw the person calling out to her was Japanese, she relaxed. The person she was facing had reddish-brown hair, dark blue eyes and was wearing a red headband around his head. He was wearing a brown leather jacket, torn, and wearing a black, sleeveless shirt underneath it. His appearance was accompanied by ripped jeans, covered in dried, white paint, blood, and dirt. With his dirt-covered face, it looked like he had been through a huge ordeal. It was in stark contrast to the much cleanlier-appearing young woman. The young man looked about the proper age to be in college, though it was hard to pinpoint what year. Why yes. The woman seemed rather easily startled. You seem lost, the young man said. Are you an honorary Brightonian? You're far too kempt to be from around here. Actually I'm from Kara, I mean, I'm from Naraki City, the woman stated. Naraki, the young man said, pushing up his bangs with his right hand, that would explain it. Hard to imagine a bustling city like that is so fab compared to the nearby war-torn, mostly empty, rumored to be haunted, low-class Karakura town. The woman merely nodded. So what are you doing all the way in Shinjuku? You're pretty far from home. I'm looking for someone, the woman answered. Out here? The young man asked. Don't you have a family of some kind or friends who need you closer to home? I haven't seen my parents since I was really little. My older brother died before I was a teenager. My friends are, no, the woman shook her head. Dead? The young man asked. No, not that, the woman answered, they'll be fine on their own. I'm sure they're adjusting to life under Brighton Neon control or rather. The young man indicated for the woman to go on. I sort of left them behind after the war to look for the person I'm looking for. Another friend? The young man asked. The woman shook her head and walked towards the young man. No, my fiancé. The young man then spotted an engagement ring on her left hand. Oh, you're engaged? He asked. The young woman stared at the ground in sorrow. I was supposed to be married after the war was over. My fiancé said he'd be right back. She started to squeak as she started to tear up, but he didn't come back. I see, and you want to know if he's alive or dead, the young man stated. The woman nodded, sniffed, and wiped her eyes. She sucked in a deep breath. But, she spoke confidently, if I find proof that he's dead, I want Britannia to pay for taking his life. That is the resolve I developed and what keeps me going every day. Well, far be it from me to stop you, but I don't think you'll find your missing fiancé around here, the young man jerked his thumb backwards. Besides, it's been 3 years, you really think he's alive? And even if he is alive, don't you think he would have told you? But he has to be alive. The woman shouted out, almost slipping into a disturbed frenzy, as if the very thought of her fiancé being dead would kill her too. And I am sure he has his reasons. When we were dating he was always busy, but he still proposed to me. I am sure he's around here too. I could have sworn I sensed his Ryotsu and, she quickly covered her mouth, whoops. What's this about spiritual pressure? The young man crinkled his brow. It's nothing, the woman said, putting a hand on her cheek and flipping her other hand up down, just a little code word my friends and I made up, she laughed nervously. Oh, all right, the young man seemed to accept it. The woman wiped her brow and let out a breath of relief. That was close. The young man studied the woman in front of him. Based on her appearance she seemed healthy enough. Given her body type and the muscle tone bleeding through her neck and through her clothes as well as the narrowness of her waist, the girth of her arms, he could see that the woman before him was in good physical shape, perhaps a practitioner of martial arts. Given she'd probably trekked out here all the way from Naraki straight to Shinjuku, more than likely on foot, she obviously had good survival skills. He would be lying if he said that he wasn't thinking that her strange demeanor when her fiancé was brought up had him questioning her mental stability, but he also believed he'd be a fool not to pass up a decent opportunity. I don't believe I caught your name, the young man stated and extended his hand. I'm Kojiki Naoto, leader of the resistance group around here. Ayanua. She stopped. Crap, if I say my real name it'll make this all pointless. Inu. Naoto encouraged for her to give her given name. Ayanu Naomi, she said quickly, it was the first given name she could think of. She quickly shook Naoto's hand. You're kind of an odd person, Naoto said with a smile. He decided to go with the friendly approach rather than be all business. The woman before him seemed like she'd been through a lot and he went with the old proverb that you collect more flies with honey than with vinegar. Oh, really? Inu was incredibly nervous. I think it's a good thing. It gives you a bit of a unique character, Naoto said, pouring on some charm. Thank you, Inu responded. So, you're just an ordinary Japanese woman, not an honorary Brighton Neon? Naoto asked. Naoto wasn't racist, but he didn't know how the others would react if an honorary Brighton Neon joined their ranks. He didn't care much though, a hater of the Empire was a hater of the Empire. Yeah, Inu nodded. Well, I know this is going to be a bit selfish, because you sound like you're trying to find your fiancé, but if you could I could use some extra hands with the resistance, Naoto stated. Huh? Inu blinked. Naoto sighed, I said before, I'm in charge of the resistance around these parts. He turned and pointed into the shadows of the most solidified, but still torn up, area of Shinjuku. Back there's my group, but we're small in number. I'm trying to raise an army and I need every bit of assistance I can get. Britannia isn't going to get away with their atrocities. Not on my watch, Naoto stated. I'm hoping that with a large number we can succeed where the Karakura 7 failed. Karakura 7. Inu tilted her head. Naoto sighed, do you live under a rock or something? You're from Naraki City, you should have heard about it. Naoto seemed to get fired up, it's the talk of resistance groups all around. The Brighton Neons never talk about it in the history books, since it's mostly just a rumor, but we know the truth through a band called the Six Fullbringers. Naoto clenched his fist and spoke. The Karakura 7 was a group of elite warriors. Some called them Phantoms of Justice since many believe they came from a higher plane of existence. The group was 7 citizens of Karakura town and they fought Britannia to a near standstill during the war. I might have heard something about them, Inu looked up to the side. She was, of course, feigning naivete. She knew about the Fullbringers band. She'd seen posters, but she never stopped, not once, to search for her fiancé. You should know more than that, Naoto stated. Well, you can tell me the whole story if you want, Inu said. It's not safe to speak here, Naoto stated. He looked all around to make sure he couldn't spot any Brighton Neons. Then he turned around and waved his arm for Inu to follow him. Come on, I'll introduce you to the rest of the guys and tell you on the way. But I never said I was joining the resistance. It would mean a lot to me if you did. Naoto turned around to face Inu again. Like I said, I'm short-staffed. Besides, I intend to drive Britannia out and if we become a big enough name, maybe your fiancé will join us and you'll find each other or you'll find out what happened to him. You can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. In truth Naoto really had no idea, but something about Inu spoke to him that told him that this woman was perfect for the resistance. Naoto knew she was, what most people would call, claimed goods, so it was not her voluptuous appearance that made him want to bring Inu to the resistance. Rather, he wanted the woman on his team for, what he believed, were her combat and survival skills. Are you sure I'm cut out to be a freedom fighter? I'll take help anywhere I can get it. I know you're engaged, but having a pretty woman around will be good for troop morale regardless. Naoto was right about that. Inu might have been off limits, but hey, she'd give the guys something to fantasize about and, hopefully, attract other women to join the movement. Naoto was enough of a gentleman though not to engage in such things and confident in his own skills to stop anyone who would dare violate such a commitment. Him and his pal Ogai can aim both. Then, Inu got pent up and crossed an arm over her bosom, then I'd be happy to join. If it will help our people and harm Britannia, I will fight. Great, follow me, Naoto stated. As Inu followed, he backed up the conversation a bit. So yeah, the Karakura 7 was this team of super elites. No one knows their real names, since people who say they saw them in action aren't really sure what they saw, so all we have now are whispered rumors and the songs from the Six Fullbringers, but I'll tell you what I've heard. First there was the man everyone calls Rockstar. With frazzled brown hair, sunglasses, and the only one actually wearing a soldier's uniform, he carried some sort of weird guitar that shot lightning and distorted the very fabric of space around him. It's theorized cutting-edge technology that was in beta development. Some of our remaining scientists have tried replicating it, but no luck. Then there was Vampire. Dressed in a leather coat with matching pants, she captivated many soldiers with her beautiful song and lulled them before sinking her teeth deep into their neck and then using it to empower herself. People said she seemed like she had a surge of energy after feeding on a victim. She was also rumored to have this familiar of some sort that was this fire demon that she controlled, a creature thought to be from hell itself. Personally, I find most of this kind of rubbish, but then again, how do you account for the body count Britannia had? A friend of mine was in the war and survived it. There is no conceivable way the normal soldiers killed as many that died. Not even Todo of Miracles I think killed that many. Then there's the guy people call the White Archer. Dressed in all white, with bluish-black hair, and wearing glasses, he rained heavenly fury upon the Brighton with a bunch of energy arrows. Again, we still haven't replicated that. And then we have the guy people call Tank Crusher. Big guy, Naoto used his arms to show the estimated proportions, only half Japanese, or so people say, had two weird-looking gauntlets on his arms, one was black and red like a shield, the other was white and red, looking like a normal gauntlet. Guy got his name from the fact that he could punch tanks right out. People said he also blew up an entire ocean liner with a blast of pure energy that seemed to be emitted from his fist. They and the songs swear it's a true story, but I don't deal in myths. And then there's the one everyone thought was really cool, and quite possibly the leader, Noble Dragon. She had lavender hair, dressed in a black and red suit. People said she had wings, but I'm not sure about that. What I do know is that she had to be probably the strongest member of that group. She supposedly punched a nightmare frame right out and could launch fire from her very being. It was like these guys mixed old magic of our history and mixed it with science and technology far beyond what scientists are capable of. People still want to know what happened to them. Then there was the other member, people called her the Angel of Japan, Naoto began. Angel, Inu was surprised. Huh? Is something the matter? Naoto asked. Nothing. Inu defended, hiding her small blush. An angel? She wasn't much of a fighter, but she spent a lot of time helping people evacuate and she protected innocents. People said that even before the seven teamed up entirely that she was already out there protecting people and healing injuries, Naoto said and then tapped the side of his forehead. She had these hairpins in her hair, blue ones shaped like flowers. Inu felt her hair itch, but ignored the temptation to scratch. She also ignored the impulse to fiddle with her front coat pocket. People said she was not only kind, but also beautiful. Inu blushed again and swallowed. Naoto finished speaking and didn't say anything else. Inu counted in her head. Wait, that's only 6, what about the 7th member? She asked. Naoto put his hands behind his head. The thing is, no one ever saw the 7th member, but people are sure there had to be. In areas where the other 6 weren't around, or even looking, soldiers and Knight Mares alike were cut down as if struck by an invisible sword. We don't know what the guy, or girl there is no way of knowing, looked like, but, we know that his, or her, greatest asset wasn't his, or her, strength, but his or her stealth. He or she was the only one, or at least we think, the Brightonians never gunned down. Since we don't know what he or she looked like, people just called him or her the mysterious unknown swordsman. Inu looked sad. That's not true. He may actually have been gunned down, in the end. Everyone else, and I agree, believes that the Brightonians waited them out. They believe that they starved them out and then when they didn't show, confirmed their suspicions. But people think that they might still be alive somewhere, perhaps waiting for the proper moment to strike. Even if they aren't, they gave some of us something that the Brightonians won't take from the rest of us, Naoto said. What's that? Inu asked. Hope, Naoto said, they've inspired other resistance groups around the country. We're probably the only established area with forms of active resistance. Every other area in the world rebels against Britannia, but they haven't a snowball's chance and their resistance is incredibly disorganized, but those 7 individuals really have done a lot for us true Japanese, especially the mysterious unknown swordsman. Naoto tilted his head up. Supposedly, according the songs, he, or she, staved off Britannia's attack all by himself on the day the bombs were dropped. He, or she, never gave up and he, or she, never surrendered. It wasn't in his, or her, vocabulary. I wish I could have met any of them. Naoto ceased his fanboyism and let out a deep breath. I guess it's like they say, some heroes aren't in the history books. By the way, we're here. Naoto gestured to a warehouse with a garage door with another bolted-up metal door nearby. Naoto knocked on the door. What's the password? A voice called from inside. Karakura 7, Naoto answered. The door opened. A man with dark green, almost black, hair styled in an afro, with a red headband tied around his head answered the door. Oh, you're back, the man said and then saw Inu. And who's this? Oh yeah, Ogai, this is Inu Naomi. Inu, meet Ogai Kaname, my second in command, Naoto told her. Konnichiwa, Ogai-kun, Inu bowed. Ah why yes, nice to meet you too, Ogai said. So. What brings you here Inu-san? I invited Inu to be one of us and she said she would. Kojiki-kun told me you were all short-staffed and so I wanted to help, Inu said with a forlorn face, which quickly hardened, and also, I want to make Britannia pay. I don't know if my fiancé is out there or looking for me and so, I want to find him and if he is gone, I want Britannia to suffer for taking him from me. I promised myself a long time ago that if I lost him that I wouldn't cry anymore. We knew each other a long time and Britannia is an enemy that I'm not afraid to fight. Naoto clapped to Inu's speech, spoken like a true freedom fighter. Come in, I'll show you around, Naoto led her inside. As they walked into the warehouse Ogai spoke to Naoto, it always worries me when you go off on your own like that sir. Hey relax, I'm old enough to be in college Ogai, I can take care of myself, Naoto shrugged off. And how am I supposed to explain that to Colin when I bring your dead body to her with a bullet in your brain because you got shot by a Brighton Neon commando? Naoto pushed Ogai aside and headed into the main area of the warehouse. Ogai, relax, that's never going to happen. The day I die will be after a long life and I'm rotting in a hospital bed due to lung cancer. Speaking of which, I need a cigarette, we got. Tamaki took the last one while you were out, Ogai said. Guess we'll have to find more then, Naoto sighed, scratching the back of his head and then walked past Ogai and Inu. Who's Colin? Inu asked. His younger sister, Ogai told her, it's the reason he started a resistance movement in the first place, besides the Karakura 7 of course. We all know it's a folk tale, and I think he does too, but we, and most other resistance groups, use it as motivation. We don't know if it's true or not, but if it is somehow true, then if those 7 could do that much damage by themselves, what could we do with much larger numbers and stolen technology? Rather, that's the rationale. But he's so young and well. Inu didn't want to point out the fact that Naoto seemed kind of cocky. I'll grant you he's inexperienced and a bit arrogant, but when he gets on the battlefield it's like he's a completely different person. All the arrogance drops and we're left with a professional soldier of some kind. And yet as soon as the confrontation is over it's back to rubbing his knuckles against his shirt. That was a piece of cake Naoto, Ogai explained. Maybe in a past life he was an amazing general or something, Inu proposed. Ogai laughed, that would explain a lot. He then noticed that Inu was staring off into space. Suddenly she started acting out whatever daydream she was in, take that. And that. She started making a sound like she was shooting bullets out of an assault rifle as she made the motion with her hands. Are you okay? Ogai asked her. Huh? Oh sorry, Inu apologized, sometimes I just get into this weird zone you know. She laughed nervously and bopped herself on the head. Naoto then came back for the two of them. Come on Inu, let me introduce you to everyone else. He brought Inu and Ogai to the back room where there were 4 other people sitting around wearing red headbands. Inu figured that symbolized them as members of the resistance, the same way the infamous Inked Alliance all wore tattoos. He gestured to a guy with auburn hair, Shinichiro Tamaki. Yo, Tamaki introduced with a cheesy grin. Kento Sugiyama, Naoto gestured to a guy with similar hairstyle to Naoto's own, but the same hair color as Inu. Greetings, Kento said with a soft smile. Yoshitaka Minami, Naoto gestured to a guy with purple hair and glasses. Minami merely nodded in acknowledgement to Inu's presence. And this is Yoshida Toru, Naoto gestured to a guy with similar hairstyle and color to his own, though a much lighter shade, also the man was closer to Inu's age, perhaps a bit older. Yoshida simply gave a wave of the hand. This is everyone? Inu asked. Well, most of our members are freelance, they come and go when they can help out, but the 6 of us have been around since I started this group, Naoto said. I take help where I can get it and I can tell from just looking at you that you're someone who can fight. I don't know how much real combat you've actually seen or what kind of training you've been through, but I just got this gut feeling that you're right for the team and I always go with my gut. Well hey, at least you recruited a girl for once. This group's too much of a sausage fest, Tamaki leaned back against a few stacks of old tires. Naoto, I don't think it's the best of ideas to grab random people out like this, Minami told him. Hey, Tamaki didn't seem like the best of recruits when I picked him either, and he's lasted this long, Naoto said casually. Yeah, you tell him, Naoto. Tamaki got pent up, not realizing that he was still being insulted in a sense. Minami pushed up his glasses. Tamaki also tends to just have some of the most stupid luck I've ever seen. And sometimes luck is what makes the difference between death and life in war, Naoto scowled. It was only for a split second, but Inu could almost feel how the cheery, cocky Naoto suddenly became fierce and serious when he spoke that line about war. Now if you guys will excuse me, I'm going to go make a phone call home, check up on Colin. Ogai, take Inu and Tamaki with you to raid a grocery store, we're running low on supplies. Understood, sir, Ogai said, and took Inu and Tamaki out into the field with him. Ogai took Tamaki and Inu to an old abandoned market. The windows were bashed in and the doors were gone, and there was no working electricity. Yet anything that wasn't perishable was still good to consume. Ogai and Tamaki got right to work loading up a cart with food each. Wait, we can just take this stuff? Inu asked. I don't see why not, Tamaki stated. Brighton Neons blasted this place to hell long ago, and the people running it are long since gone. We're lucky there's still food left to take. But isn't that stealing? Inu asked. We do what we can to survive, Ogai said. I'm not exactly proud of it either, but this is something we have to do. If you don't want to pack stuff, go keep watch then, Tamaki told Inu as he kept putting food into a shopping cart. Oh okay, Inu said and walked out to stand outside and look. With the exception of the ruined store, the only things around were destroyed skyscrapers, torn up streets, fallen telephone poles, buildings that looked like they should be part of the Stone Age with the way they had been blasted, and even scraps of metal that used to be parts of cars. The scenery gave the blue-haired woman a perfect view of the sky above. She looked up, wondering if her fiancé was looking up at her under the same sky. As she stood there thinking, the sensation of a strand of Ryotsu caught her off guard. She looked around for it and pinpointed the location. She ran forward, turned around and looked up. Atop a ruined skyscraper, standing on the remains of a metal floor, was a figure garbed in completely black clothing. It looked like a Shiakusho, except that everything was black, the Waraji, the Tabi, even the Shitaji. On the figure's head was a hood, completely keeping their identity concealed from Inu's sight from the distance they were at. Were they a man or a woman? It was impossible to tell. Is that? She was about to guess, but suddenly she saw the person vanish, leaving no trace. Shunpo most likely. Ah! Inu reached out, but it was pointless. The hooded figure was long gone and far too far away to be sensed. Who was that just now? That was definitely a Soul Reaper. Inu thought to herself. But who exactly? It was too far away for me to completely sense their Ryotsu, but there was something familiar about it. Inu stood there, staring into space until Tamaki and Ogai were ready to take their selections back to the hideout. Plenty of junk food and high-calorie foods were mixed in, but there was also some canned food and instant noodles, and thankfully the hideout they had water and electricity. Unfortunately, sleeping bags weren't as abundant. The group had 6 members, 7 counting Inu, but there were only 4 sleeping bags. 2 people normally traded off watch while the other caught several Zs resting against the wall, weapon across their lap, but a 5th one hadn't been gotten for Inu. It was Ogai's turn to keep watch that night, and Yoshida was his alternate. That meant one of the remaining 4 would have to have a nice comfortable spot on the floor. I guess I'll sleep on the floor. The newbie should have a bed to sleep in until we get another one, Naoto said. Actually, maybe I'll head home this evening. Colin probably would love to see me. She probably would. You don't check in often enough, Ogai told Naoto. Hey, fighting for freedom is a tough job, but someone's gotta do it. He went into the back room and changed out of his clothes, took a shower and everything. He came back in a finely pressed long-sleeve Henley and what looked like brand new jeans. His hair was also combed and away from his eyes. I'll see you guys later. Give my regards to your mom, Ogai told him. Yeah, I'll be sure to. I'll see you guys tomorrow afternoon, Naoto said and headed on out. Is it okay for him to be off on his own like that? Inu asked. Naoto's smart enough not to be caught by Brighton Neons. Once he's out of Shinjuku, he'll be fine, Ogai told Inu only for everyone to hear an engine start up followed by the sound of a car driving away. Plus he has his license. Anyway, I'd better keep an eye on things. You guys get some sleep. Yoshida, I'll wake you when it's your turn. Yoshida nodded and everyone else tuckered into their sleeping bags. Inu bunkered down in the one that was open and pulled the old pillow she had to use to sleep towards herself. It wasn't a luxury suite, but then again, she'd had to sleep on worse during her travel out here. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought, wondering if she was doing the right thing, wondering if this was such a good idea. She was far away from home, away from her friends who were probably very worried about her. Her cell phone was long since out of batteries and she'd had to hide her prized hairpins and necklace in her shirt pocket to avoid fewer encounters from shady thugs and dishonest Brighton Neons. She was lucky she'd had a black belt since high school, she'd made good use of it in those encounters. Still, as she lay there, unsure how to fall asleep, she blinked out a tear. She missed her home. She missed Karakura town. She missed her friends and, above all, she missed her fiancé. I give you my word. I'll come back even if you have to drag me back by my legs and pull me from the brink of death. That's what you said, so where are you? Inu sniffed and turned on her side, finally finding sleep taking her. Ichigo, my love. End of chapter 154. Chapter 155, Naoto's death, Inu's pain. Area 11. Autumn 2014. Inu had spent a year under Naoto's command. Despite the obvious factor of her being engaged, that hadn't stopped her presence of being the only hot chick on the permanent members to help with morale, like Naoto said. Of course, morale seemed to be about the only thing Inu was good for these days. She was very pacifistic, rarely fired and never took a life. It confused the hell out of Naoto and the others, but without Inu the group would have lost a lot of good men. Inu was very good at dressing their wounds. And on nights when she was on watch, sometimes the group would wake up one morning and their wounds would be gone as if they had never existed in the first place. Inu also helped a lot with being a good cook. She had a culinary degree, and despite the fact that her dishes contained some weird ingredients, what she made was never inedible. One time she stirred up spicy curried refried beans and rice with pineapple, broccoli, and melted cheese. A strange dish to be sure, but it went over well with the group. Inu was so good that the group put her on permanent cooking duty on nights when they needed a hot meal. Inu always seemed to be able to scavenge up something together. Naoto actually brought leftovers to his family once, his portion only, and Colin and his family each had a bite. Even his stepmom thought it was delicious. Naoto, who made this for you? Are you seeing some special lady friend? Colin asked and pinched her brother's cheek with a crafty smile. No, she's just a friend, Colin. Besides, she's way older than me. Hey, there's nothing wrong with liking older women, son. Dad, Naoto groaned, palming his face. Tamaki always had to make note how good Inu's cooking was, sometimes even saying that her new dish was better than any of the old ones. After several years of living off uncooked food and instant noodles, it was nice to have someone around who finally could cook. True, boiling water was difficult, but it was nothing a cigarette lighter couldn't handle generally. This is delicious, Tamaki smacked his lips together in delight. You may not be a good fighter, but you're an awesome cook, Inu. I wish I was the one engaged to you. I could eat your cooking every day. Inu took the compliment politely, but the day he had said it, she found it impossible to get any sleep that night. She wasn't on watch, Ogai was out now and Tamaki was his replacement. She exited the base and wandered out into the night air. It was a little chilly, but that's why she had her jacket. She stood out in the open night sky and looked up at all the stars. She clasped her hands together in front of her breasts. She looked up at the sky in forlorn hope. Suddenly she heard footsteps. She took a fighting stance, but relaxed when she saw Naoto with a lantern. Keikozuki-kun. Couldn't sleep either, huh? Naoto asked and put the lantern down on the ground and sat down. He took out a box of cigarettes. He would have offered one to Inu, but he and the others had learned she never drank or smoked. She understood why the others did it. They had run out of hope and didn't care what happened to their bodies. Inu still had so much to live for. Naoto sucked on the nicotine and exhaled. He's one lucky guy, your fiancé. I don't want to talk about him. No? You sure think about him a lot. That's. Inu stammered. It was true, but she thought she hid it. You always mumble his name in your sleep. Ichigo, is that his name? Ah, yes. Naoto took another puff. Ichi for one and go for protector, right? Ah, yeah, how did you? Even Inu had made the mistake of incorrectly deciphering her fiancé's name. It's the manliest thing I could think of, Naoto said, looking up at the stars. You, yourself seem like this helpful damsel sometimes. It's only natural you'd want someone strong to protect you, or rather that's what I've always pictured. His parents would have to be pretty cruel to name him after a fruit or just make his name 2 numbers. He took another puff. So that was the only idea I had left. I talk in my sleep. Well, you don't sleepwalk or say coherent sentences, but you're always calling for him and you look so sad as if your dreams are recalling painful memories, but, Naoto took a puff, I guess that's none of my business. It's not what you think. Inu suddenly said sternly. Naoto turned his head in confusion. I really miss him. He's never done anything to me. Naoto stood up and reached his hand out towards Inu to put in on her cheek. What are you doing? Naoto pat her cheek and walked around behind her. Just checking. Naoto had administered a psychological test he'd come to understand from research. If a person jumped back when you reached out to them in affection, it was generally a sign that they were traumatized by some form of past abuse, but Inu had just stood there, blushing. He's a terrible fiancé to abandon you like this. You sure he has his reasons? I'm positive, Inu nodded. Naoto sighed, well, if he's out there we'll find him. Ichigo, I feel like I know that name from somewhere. You're probably just imagining it, Inu told him, eager to keep Naoto in the dark. Naoto shrugged. Yeah, maybe. Well, anyway, you should probably get some sleep. You're not on watch and it's your shift tomorrow. Inu nodded. She went back inside and fell right asleep. 2 weeks later. Naoto had finally caught Clovis' attention. The setup had been long, but worth it. Inu had been with Naoto for a year now, so she was used to jobs like pickpocketing, larceny, vandalism and the occasional trespassing and leaving a marker in restricted access territory to prove that her group existed and was sneaky enough to leave things behind without getting caught, but nothing could prepare her for something Naoto said he'd been planning for months. Inu, Ogai, Naoto, and Tamaki all saddled up in an inconspicuous vehicle and drove up to a small firm that Naoto's dad and the Viceroy were invested in. It was a Brighton Neon research laboratory. As they sat in the car, Naoto held up what looked like a detonator. Inu gasped when she saw Naoto casually push the button and the whole building went up in flames. Drive! 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 Naoto shouted at Ogai. Inu was panicking. Who knew how many innocent people were inside that firm? However, she had no time to harp on it because she and the others were being followed. Clovis had been aware of Naoto's plan since Naoto hadn't exactly been ultra careful in his planning. Naoto had been caught on security camera at least once or twice, so Clovis knew he was trespassing, but was not sure as to why. He had his face covered so he couldn't be identified. So Clovis knew something was going to happen at the firm. So now Naoto and the others were being chased by helicopters and then some nightmare frames were deployed. Damn it! They're going to track us right back to our hideout. Tamaki exclaimed. Don't worry. I've already set up a rendezvous point with some backup. Naoto had Ogai drive straight into a ditch. Thankfully everyone was wearing their seat belts. They all exited the car and began to unleash hell upon Britannia using the weapons Naoto had loaded into the back of the vehicle. Naoto ordered Inu to a specific location to help some of his allies as Britannia came, and he and his allies attempted to fight back. Using money stolen from his dad, Naoto had managed to smuggle some RPGs and a few rocket launchers from the docks. A full-out battle was about to begin. After an explosion caused by a grenade fired from a helicopter covered Inu in a fine layer of dirt, she panicked and ran for cover. She sat still on the ground, holding her head and sitting behind some ruins for cover. Inu was traumatized, unsure how to focus or fight. What do I do? I know I said I'd help, but I don't know what to do. Oh God, all those people. Inu stayed panicking for a little and just watched the scene unfold. The Japanese were getting butchered. The battle was completely one-sided. It was just like the war 4 years ago. Inu didn't know what to do and went back to panicking. This was Naoto's first statement against Britannia, and there was a good chance it would all be over today. She shook with fear as she didn't know what to do regarding fighting back or just retreating and surviving. If anyone took a look into Inu's brain at this moment, they would find that what happened next could only be explained by questioning if she really did believe that her fiancé was still out there somehow, or if the pain of losing him was so much for her to bear that she couldn't help but cling to the dark hope that he was still alive. It consumed her mind. Inu trembled and shook. Her hero was not here to save her. She was in trouble and she couldn't cope with the harshness of reality. She had fought of Britannian soldiers before, but her friends had been her rock of inspiration. True, she had made new friends, but they didn't instill the same hope in her as her old friends did. What they did instill was what Inu saw as desperate struggle, the same desperate struggle she faced 4 years ago. Had she never found the body, or in her psychotic mental state did she miss it because that was what she wanted to see? This careful analysis of Inu's brain was the only way to psychologically explain why she suddenly heard her fiancé's voice. Don't give up, Orium. Inu gasped and her eyes shot open. Standing in front of her, arms stretched out, head in front of the light cast by the sun, was her lost love, Kurosaki Ichigo. He was as charming as she remembered. His gentle smile, flapping wearing dusty brown cloak and orange hair, filled her with warmth, and Inu took the imaginative hand reaching out to her and stood up. Ichigo. You can't give up hope yet, his voice echoed as he stood between her and the sun. I'm waiting for you to find me. Your new friends need you to fight for them. Protect them, Inu, protect them like I protected you and you helped protect Japan. Inu hugged the illusion of her fiancé. Even a person with spiritual power would perceive the blue-haired woman as hugging absolutely nothing. Don't give up. The illusion dispersed into light. Inu sucked back her tears. Something deep within her came out. She hugged her body tightly, gave a confident look, and then grabbed 2 hairpins from her coat pocket. They were sky blue and had 6-petal flower on each of them. I have the power to protect, Inu declared. She rushed away from her spot of safety and rushed forward with a blood-hungry scowl placed upon her face. She saw one Britannian soldier and all she saw was an obstacle. Katanzan-shun. I reject. A piece of the hairpin flew out and split the soldier in half before he even knew what hit him. Inu's friends were either too injured or too far away to take notice of what was going on around her, which was good news for the blue-haired woman. A soldier came up towards the busted blue-haired bombshell, but she retaliated violently. She made the same declaration as before. She split him in half before looking at an approaching nightmare frame. Sotenkishun. I reject. A bubble formed around the nightmare frame, invisible to the pilot, but not to Inu, as she dissolved the mecha before his very eyes, and then he too met the same fate as his buddy and was split in half. A sniper bullet rocketed towards Inu, but she was prepared to defend herself. Shitenko-shun. I reject. The countering shield reflected the bullet and ripped into her attacker's shoulder. Santen Ba-shishun. I reject. 3 sacred spinning shield, using the combination of Hinajiku, Lily, and Tsubaki, Orium formed a spinning equilateral triangle that went spinning through the air like a shuriken. She sent the projectile flying everywhere, disarming enemies from all around. However, as she held her hairpins in her hand, retracting them back to their neutral state, trying to pluck out enemies with her eyes and ears since Ryutsu didn't work against normal enemies, a bullet from far away, that she wasn't aware of, came in and shot Inu's hand, crippling her left hand, but more importantly, knocking her hairpins clean away and out of sight. If not for her Ryutsu, she would have suffered more severe damage. Wide-eyed in terror at losing the only thing that gave her power, Inu frantically began to search for her hairpins, hoping they weren't damaged. She began digging through the dirt and gravel, but wherever her hairpins had slid away to, they were long gone. There were plenty of small sewer grates the little things could have slid into, or perhaps a mouse had picked them up and taken them because they were shiny. Regardless, they were gone and Anu had no weapon. She did the only thing she knew how to do when she was powerless, frantically run for cover and panic. However, as she panicked, all she could think of was the image of her fiancé that had bathed her in a warm light that she deluded herself into thinking was some sort of mystical force and not the natural heat produced by the sun's rays. Anu took a deep breath and realized that she only had one option if she wanted to live to see another day, and with the prospect of finding her long-departed fiancé on the line, she had no hesitation in making the decision. Moving like an acrobat, Anu weaved and ducked for cover before heading for the body of one of the dead soldiers she had killed by following the trail of her own Ryotsu. She raided the body for weaponry and looted several grenades and a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. She clipped the grenades to her coat pockets, scowled and took action. She grabbed the enemy radio transmitter and snuck up on several soldiers by hiding on the other side of their jeep. She then unhooked one of the 4 grenades she had on her, pulled the pin, waited approximately 2 seconds and then rolled it like bowling ball underneath the jeep and ran, blasting the enemies to smithereens. Anu then continued to make her march and shot a Brighton Neon in the face with the shotgun in her hand. She used her bum left hand to steady the gun, not even caring how much it hurt or how much she was bleeding. The wound would plug up eventually, nothing a little first aid couldn't handle. The bullet had only grazed her thumb and index finger and hadn't shattered her whole hand. Anu had taken that last jump of what held back the woman of war deep within the friendly woman she always maintained. The pacifism gone, all that was left was the killer hidden deep within. She had been pushed over the edge. The 12-gauge ran out of ammo, but thankfully Anu was able to find a pair of pistols just lying around. Anu began walking around, firing off the weapons and acting like she no longer could take it anymore. She saw enemies approaching and mercy was all but gone from her. If any of her friends could see her, they would not see the sweet, smiling, nice teenage girl they had known and loved. There was only one emotion. Her soul, full on fire, was filled with hate. Hate for Britannia and their destruction. Her kindness was gone. Would it return? No one who knew Anu could tell if they saw her now. Sweat filling her pores, dirt and dust covering her body and blasts of gunfire exiting from within her general facility, she was no longer playing the nice girl act. She was giving into her animal instincts and now she was killing anything and everything she could. She was fine up until her foot stepped on something fleshy. She stopped moving and looked down. Naoto was below her in a pool of his own blood. He had been shot and was coughing up blood. Anu's adrenaline rush left her and she dropped her weapons to check on Naoto's condition. Kojiki-kun. Naoto could barely see due to the blood loss. From the angle of the sunlight all he could see was someone standing over him. Naoto coughed as Anu cradled him. Only one person would refer to me like that. Hey, Anu, he gargled and coughed. I messed up. Anu panicked. Of all times for me to lose my hairpins, why now? Kojiki-kun, Kojiki-kun. Naoto reached up and brushed a thumb under Anu's eye. His sight was failing him so he had to rely more on his sense of touch. Tears for me? You're too kind, Anu. You have to hang on, we'll get through this. You'll get help. Naoto's hand slumped from Anu's cheek as his strength began to fail him. Haphazardly he fumbled for her hand. He gripped it. I knew this was going to happen eventually, Anu. Britannia is a powerful enemy. Naoto coughed up more blood. If anything, I'm glad I was able to recruit someone like you. You have a good heart. You're the kind of person this group needs. But I'm not a leader, Anu sniffed. I know, but you need to be a good supporter for the person that takes the lead. Ogai will be in charge for now, but I have this gut feeling that you all are going to have a great leader by your side soon enough. Our group will grow. Britannia will suffer for what they've done. Colin, will, be, ha, ppy. Then suddenly his hand slipped out of Anu's grasp and fell towards the ground. I couldn't save Japan. Colin, Mom, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Naoto took another look at Anu as she stood over him and the last thing he saw before his eyes closed was her silhouette. Kojiki-kun. No answer. Kojiki-kun. She checked for a pulse, nothing. Kojiki-kun. No, this isn't happening. First Soma-san, then Ichigo, now Kojiki-kun. Inu bit her lip as she cradled her friend's dead body. She shouted towards the sky. How many friends will you take from me until you're satisfied? Do you hear me, Britannia? When will you spill enough blood? Inu let go of Naoto and dropped to her hands and knees in grief. When it mattered most, I can't protect anyone. Why am I fighting? What am I doing here? Inu, we need to pull back, Ogai said as he backed up while firing at the enemy. Be but Kojiki-kun, he's. Take his body and let's go. Be but. Even if you have to drag me back by my legs to save me from the brink of death. Inu glanced back at Naoto and with a tearful smile hoisted his body onto her back. All that physical training she had done in the last several years was really starting to pay off. I can't save you, Kojiki-kun, but closure is better than always wondering. I know that better than anyone here. With a heavy heart, Inu brought Naoto back to the base. She was the most sorrowful out of the entire group. As the person standing closest to her, Yoshida did his best to comfort her, by pushing on her shoulder and pushing her towards him, but Inu seemed to refuse the comforting embrace by any of the members. Just let it go, Yoshida, Ogai told him. He sighed and watched Inu as she held her body. She obviously wants him to comfort her, but he's not around to do so. What kind of man lets his woman cry like this without being here to help her? However, in Inu's mind, Ichigo was around. She could feel his comforting embrace and his arms around her. She let her arms unhook from each other and she reached out to grip his shiakusho. The others weren't paying attention to her, except for Ogai, and he was confused. Does she believe he's standing right there? It'll be okay, the hallucination of Ichigo told Inu. Things will get better once you find me. It's not the end. Naoto is in Soul Society now. He's with Lelouch. So don't cry, be strong for your new friends. But I want you and my old friends. You tell me to find you, but where are you? Inu. Tamaki heard her talking to herself, but Ogai stopped him. Don't approach her. She seems to be having an episode of sorts. If we shake her from it, there's no telling how she might react. An episode? Minami asked. You mean she's hallucinating? That's a blunt way of putting it, but yeah. Then what's she doing here? She should be in therapy, Minami said. She probably knows that, but she's here anyway. We all have problems and she's helping us despite her problems. Would you turn someone away who's being so selfless? Minami shut up. The others watched Inu. No, don't leave. Please, tell me where you are. Inu ran down the empty room chasing after the illusion of Ichigo. Never give up hope. Ichigo. Never give up hope, Orium. Inu lost the strength in her legs and dropped to the ground and cried some more. It's so hard not to, when you're not here. Ichigo. After everyone had properly grieved and Inu seemed strong again, Ogai knew that the group would have to tell Mrs. Kojiki and Colin. He didn't want to go alone, so he had to bring someone with him. Everyone drew straws and Inu got the short straw. Tamaki volunteered to take her place after what the group had just witnessed her go through. Minami made sure, of course, no one let it slip that they were under the impression of Inu's mental illness so as not to trample on her mind and wound her further. Inu, however, shook her head and said she would go. I need to be strong for people who have more of a reason to grieve. Let's go, Ogai-kun. Ogai and Inu took Naoto's body with them in Naoto's car. Ogai drove while Inu sat in the back seat. She had Naoto's head on her lap. She had cleaned up his blood and patched up his wounds. If it wasn't for the fact that he wasn't breathing, one could pretend that he was just sleeping and would be awake soon. Inu almost let more tears escape her, but she held it together. She had her time to grieve, right now other people needed her to be strong. She could cry more later. The duo arrived as Ogai walked down the cobblestone pathway to ring the doorbell. Mrs. Kojiki answered it. Inu stayed back with Naoto's body and Ogai asked if Mrs. Kojiki and Colin would come outside. His demeanor and request brought the kind of weight with it like the knock on the door every parent dread about their children. Naoto. In her maid uniform, Mrs. Kojiki ran out into the yard to Naoto's side. She saw his lifeless body and her eyes filled with tears. No. She hesitantly reached towards him, completely in shock, and then held her dead son to her and yelled out, "Nuhu!" Colin, age 14, stood frozen in paralysis, unsure what to do. "I'm sorry, Colin," Ogai said to her, looking down at the floor. Colin's eyes turned wide with terror. And no, he wouldn't. She saw the depressed look on Orium's face. "No, you're lying." Colin's hands bunched up into fists. "San promised." "He promised." Colin shouted and stood still and sobbed as tears streamed down her face. Mrs. Kojiki howled louder and Ogai dropped to one knee to help console her. Inu walked over to Colin and pushed the girl's face into her ample bosom to help Colin confront her feelings. "I'm so sorry, Colin-chan," Inu told her. She put her other arm around Colin. "Naoto," Mrs. Kojiki sobbed as she cradled her son's dead body and sat on her knees as she rocked back and forth. "Idiot! Idiot! Idiot! Idiot!" Colin sobbed as she slammed the sides of her fist into Inu's shoulder. The older woman didn't even flinch. "Idiot! Idiot! San! You idiot!" Hearing Colin yell out in her native tongue, brought more of a tremendous weight to it than hearing her yell in Brighton Neon. Inu wished she could have attended the funeral, but she had no civilian identity and nothing to wear to attend. Ogai was there though, and he told Colin that he and the others sent their regards. Inu told Ogai what Naoto had said to her right before he died. Ogai reluctantly took command. Since he wasn't as brave or as bold as Naoto, he tried to have the group lay low, overstock supplies and branch out to try and recruit new members. His lack of boldness made him a lot more discreet than Naoto, so there was a lot less fighting. However, this only went on for a few weeks before something unexpected happened. A loud banging came to the hideout door. Tamaki answered. "What's the password?" "Karakura 7. Ogai, problem." Tamaki recognized the voice at the door instantly. Ogai came over and looked through the peephole. He opened it promptly. "Colin, what are you doing here?" "I want to fight for Japan's future too," Colin exclaimed. "No, absolutely not, out of the question." Ogai dismissed. "But why?" Colin looked like she was going to cry. "Naoto would kill me if something happened to you." "I couldn't." "Naoto's dead," Colin shouted as tears came out. Inu had overheard the noise and came out to see what was going on. Colin-chan. Just go back inside, Inu, I'm handling this." "Why, what's going on?" she asked. "I want to be a freedom fighter too, but Ogai won't let me." "Why are you complaining to her, when I'm the one in charge?" "Naoto always said that Inu was a sweet woman, that she understands people's pain. He also told me he never wanted you to be on this team." "That's not true," Inu said. Ogai looked at her with a frown. "Naoto wanted Colin-chan to be happy, that's why he was a freedom fighter, but he's not here anymore." Inu gave a strong look. "It's not easy, but if being with us will make Colin-chan happy, then she should be with us. She's also only 15, Inu. She shouldn't be here. She should be in school. Schools are for Brightonians." "I'm Japanese," Colin exclaimed. "What would your mother do if she lost you too?" Ogai asked. "Mother always cared about Naoto more than she did me. I don't matter to her." "That's a horrible thing to say," Inu exclaimed. "But it's true. Everything in the house growing up was Naoto this and Naoto that. So can I join?" "Please, Ogai, for Naoto's sake I deserve to see his vision become a reality. If Kojiki-kun were alive. If Naoto were alive, we wouldn't be having this discussion. He'd tell Colin to go home," Ogai said sharply. Kojiki-kun was never that kind of person. If Colin-chan was this determined, Inu put on a big smile, "He'd ask you," she referred to Colin, "if your mind was made up." "It is. There's nothing you can say that can sway me. There's no telling what could happen. I don't care. It'll be dangerous. Bring it." Then, Inu extended her arm out to Colin. "Welcome to the team, Colin-chan." "That's what I think he'd say." Ogai sighed. "I swear I am way too easily swayed by beautiful women," he muttered as he looked up at the sky. Fine, he said looking back down at the ground, but Colin, please be careful. I'll be fine, you'll see. I have it all figured out. We'll see, Ogai said and headed inside, leaving Inu and Colin alone outside. Arigato, Colin bowed to Inu. You don't have to thank me. I just want your Nii-san's wishes respected. Kojiki-kun was a good person. Ogai did make a good point though, are you sure you don't mind having someone as young as me on the team? Inu walked over to Colin and put her hands on the teenager's shoulders. I learned a long time ago that you're never too young to try and change the world. If there's an injustice, you should stand up for it and fight for what's right. As Inu stared into Colin's eyes, she projected an astral image of teen versions of her fiancé and her best friend, Arisawa Tatsuki, standing next to Colin, each with an arm stretched out and touching the redhead's shoulder. So alike, Inu thought to herself. Why are you smiling? Colin asked, and only after that did Inu realize her emotions had gotten the better of her, but she made a nice save. You remind me of my best friend and my fiancé when they were your age, full of vigor, ready to tackle the world. That sort of readiness can move the world and cause it to change. It's not the only component, but it can help a great deal. Did your fiancé say that once? Colin asked. Inu shook her head, though she knew it would fit in line with Ichigo's philosophies. No, this came, she was about to say Lelich's name only to hold her tongue in case Colin might know him, considering she was half Britannian. The chances were small, but it was a risk not worth taking, she figured. Inu laughed as she stopped herself and simply said, No, it was said to me, to all of my friends and me, by a wise old friend. If you have such great friends, why are you here? Colin asked. My fiancé is missing. I'm hoping that, if I fight for long enough, he might find me or we might run into him in another resistance group. That's pretty shallow. Inu let go of Colin and smiled. I can tell you the full details another time, but that's the basics of it. You're a little strange. Inu bopped herself on the head. Yeah, Kojiki-kun said the same thing. Colin tensed up at the mention of her brother and looked to the side in sorrow. In the next moment her face was in a head-on collision with Inu's supple chest. I know what it's like to lose an older brother that means a lot to you. You're lucky you still have your family, but I know it can't be easy. So if you need someone to rely on, then I can be your Nii-san, Colin-chan. Inu's eyes welled with tears. Are you trying to make me cry? Colin asked, pushing up as best she could so that she could breathe. There's nothing wrong with crying. Inu recalled a memory when this situation was reversed for her. My bosom, she sniffed and then said tearfully, is your pillow. Colin couldn't keep it bottled up anymore and she and Inu both stood there crying and holding onto each other. Inu's embrace was both sisterly and motherly as she comforted Colin and let out the pain of her own shattered soul. No matter what happens in this war with Britannia, you and I will always have each other. Next Monday. Colin moved around her bed, faking illness. She had already used a heating pad to warm a thermometer and had already sat in her room for several minutes working up a sweat before crawling into bed with a cool pack to feign illness. It worked flawlessly. Her stepmom didn't care and her mother took Colin's word for it that she was feeling sick. After that it was all a matter of sneaking out of the house every now and then or saying she was well enough to move around, but not well enough to go to school and she was home free. As the daughter of the Stadfield family, no one in the administration batted an eyelash and all it took were some puppy dog eyes to her father and Colin had the whole house oblivious to her double life. This is too easy. Colin chuckled. I wonder if I could fool a man once or twice playing the innocent, frail girl card. All's fair in love and war, as they say. In the first 2 weeks as a freedom fighter, Colin more than proved her worth to the team. Her small, athletic body made her nimble, discreet, and difficult to track. If she was being chased, all she had to do was break away from the group, put her hair back down and give a doe-eyed dazed look, sometimes feigning collapsation, and most soldiers would recognize her as Colin Stadfield and the next thing she'd know she was home. She couldn't believe how such a simple change of hairstyle, and sometimes wearing her clothes she had worn that morning underneath her freedom fighter outfit, could fool so many soldiers so easily, and how her parents never asked why she was constantly being found passed out in the ghettos. Her biological mother did only once, and Colin's answer was a simple, gentle, because it's part of my heritage and I like exploring the lower class, dear mother. Colin then, to cover up her story, would then visit other ghettos. And that is how Colin soon found herself making a visit to Karakara town. June 26, 2015 ATB. Colin had taken liberties of going out camping with some friends. Her house wasn't exactly the warmest place in the world. Her stepmom was happy to have Colin out of the house, her dad was too busy to care, and Colin's biological mother just smiled and told her to have a good time. Going out camping, of course, translated to searching Karakara town. Ogai and the others were all going out to Naraki City to spread their cause and look for potential allies, but they would be operating from within Karakara town since it was a much darker part of the neighborhood, while Naraki was a bustling city. No one was a citizen of Karakara town any longer. The Brightonians had neglected to rebuild it and had destroyed all sources of food, water, and electrical power during and shortly after the war. Supplies would be impossible to obtain, so the time spent there would be short and the group would be trekking supplies with them in the several vehicles the group actually owned. Camp was set up, and to the average Brightonian it wouldn't look any more suspicious than an urban camping trip. However, if Cornelia was in charge of Area 11, and not Clovis, and she caught wind of it, there would be Brightonians swarming the area and making interrogations. Clovis was inadequate as a ruler. He did a fine job of ruling, but there were so many holes in his security compared to Area 9's Viceroy, Meredith Mirdia. However, Clovis was well protected enough that Ogai's group was ill-equipped to make an invasion. In fact, he was well protected enough that even the Chinese would have a hard time overtaking Japan before reinforcements arrived. After unloading their bags, and setting up camp, Colin sat down on an upside-down crate and drank a bottle of water underneath the grey, cloudy sky. She then noticed Inu talking to Ogai before the blue-haired woman slipped away and went off on her own. Discreetly, Colin followed her, wondering if she could learn more about her surrogate sister. Colin crept up on her companion, but eventually she lost sight of her. She wound up getting lost and walking the empty streets of Karakara town completely alone as the rain began to come down. It wasn't long before someone snuck up on her. "Did you get lost here, kid?" Colin was spooked and turned around and took a right lead stance, ready to take on whatever snuck up behind her with martial arts. She was facing a person in a lightweight, white hoodie and black sweatpants, odd attire choice for the middle of summer. Who are you? That's my line. The person, based on their frame, voice, and lip consistency, was a woman. This is my domain, little girl. I don't take kindly to trespassers. This is the resting place of my best friend. I won't allow anyone to violate this sacred ground, even minors. Before Colin knew what was happening, the woman had her hoisted up above her head, crushing Colin's windpipe, causing her to gasp for air. Colin-chan. Inu began bounding up the pathway, and the moment she was in the sights of the woman trying to kill her, Colin was dropped and her attacker ran like a frightened animal. Wait, come back. Leaving Colin to her own devices, Inu ran after the woman in the hoodie. She seemed to be putting the distance between the two of them until Inu dug deep into her reserves and sprinted towards the hooded woman and then tackled her from behind and pinned her to the ground. She lifted up the woman's hood. Her gaze was met by brown eyes and long, raven-colored hair. Tatsuki-chan. She looked at the girl in the hoodie with surprise. The woman gasped and flung Inu off of her and ran. Tatsuki-chan, wait. Inu sprang to her feet and grabbed Tatsuki from behind, pulling her close, head on the back of the girl's shoulder. The rain was starting to come down in buckets now. Why are you running away from me? Let go, the raven-haired woman snarled under breath. But Tatsuki-chan. I said let go. Inu was completely shocked when a fierce blow to her abdomen was delivered by the woman's elbow. Inu looked at the woman she had called Tatsuki. Why? Tatsuki-chan, it's me. The scowling woman let go of her anger and stared in horror. Ori, hi, me. That's right, Inu smiled. You're alive. Inu gasped and asked in anguish, how could you think I wasn't? With a heavy regretful look, Tatsuki dropped to her knees and hugged Inu. Orium, she was crying. It's okay, Tatsuki-chan. I know you would never hurt me on purpose. It's okay. I thought we'd lost you too, Tatsuki sobbed. I'm very much alive, why would you think that? I looked everywhere, I couldn't find you. I didn't want to be found, Orium told her. I'm a freedom fighter now. I'm going to be fighting for Japan's liberation with Colin-chan and Ogai-kun. Tatsuki-chan, what happened to you, what have you been doing? The rain let up a little, but still continued to come down. I can't do it, Orium. Do what? Move forward, Tatsuki sobbed. Our lives, everything was so perfect, and then Britannia took it all away from us. And for 2 years I thought they'd taken you too. All of a sudden I couldn't sense your spirit energy. I thought they'd gotten you too. I've spent the last 5 years just being a drifter. I don't have a job or a place to lay my head every day. Tatsuki stood up and stared at the ground. I can't move on, Orium. I can't pretend to be normal. Tatsuki flung her arm out and Orium watched as a piece of rubble exploded with fiery energy. What kind of human being has that kind of power? I'm a warrior, not a civilian. I can't just go back to the way things were after all that's happened. Britannia took everything, my home, my job, and him. Tatsuki lifted her head up and shouted at the sky. I want Ichigo back. Tatsuki slumped on her feet, feeling like she might fall over any second. Orium came up behind her and gave her a big hug, one arm above her bust, the other below it. Oh, Orium. The blue-haired woman put her head on the back of Tatsuki's shoulders. He's out there, somewhere, Tatsuki-chan, I just know he is. He can't be. Why do you say that? Orium asked inquisitively. 9 days ago I went to visit his mother's grave. I spent the entire day there from midnight to midnight. He never showed. Ichigo always has remembered his mother's death date, even when he was in college. If he was out there, he would have been there. He's gone and I can't accept that fact. I'm a broken woman, Orium. I'm nothing anymore. Tatsuki looked solemnly up at the sky. I haven't cut my hair in 5 years, slept in a decent bed or eaten a decent meal. It's just been me and Kaibun all on our own. I can't do it much longer. When I thought I lost you, I didn't think I could go on. I've just been waiting here, waiting to die. You can't do that, Tatsuki-chan is my best friend. But I thought I lost you, don't you understand? Tatsuki asked in anguish. Don't you ever do that to me again. She shouted. I'm sorry, Tatsuki-chan, Orium held on to her best friend. The rain continued to pour and claps of thunder could be heard as Tatsuki held on to her best friend. Why did you disappear? I'm sorry. Why did you make me think you were dead? Tatsuki asked, louder, practically shouting. I'm sorry. Orium exclaimed. I'm sorry, Tatsuki-chan. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Orium began to cry. You're not the only one who's suffering, okay? Tatsuki's anguish let up on the anger on a dime and all she could feel was simple pain as she held her best friend. I'm so stupid to yell at her like that. Ichigo was my best friend, but she was supposed to be married to him. Of course she'd be suffering more than me. I'm sorry, Orium. Tatsuki tightened her embrace so that Orium could grieve and looked at the ground over her shoulder in anguish. All the while the rain fell down. When the wet weather decided to finally lessen, Orium and Tatsuki stood apart from each other, prepared to go their separate ways. Are you going back to the resistance? Tatsuki asked Orium. I'm a freedom fighter now, Tatsuki-chan. It's what I do. What are you going to do, Tatsuki-chan? Tatsuki balled a fist. I don't know what I should do. My feet are still cemented into the past, I can't move forward. The rain stopped, but the sky remained gray. She turned around to face her best friend's back. What should I do, Orium? Orium thought of an idea and turned around and extended her arm out with a smile. Tatsuki-chan should come with me and be a freedom fighter. You know I can't do that. Tatsuki closed her eyes and then reopened them. It's not my place. It can be. I can't do it, Orium. Tatsuki raised her voice. Tatsuki imbued her hand with flame and looked at it. If I can't fight at full power, then what point is there for me to fight? She let the flame go. Besides, what you're doing is dangerous. You can get yourself killed for real. And I can't detect you for some reason from so far away. If I'm in trouble, Ichigo will come save me. He always saves me when I'm in trouble, Orium said with anguished eyes as she put her hand upon her chest. He's gone, Orium. He's not coming back. That's not true. I know he's alive. He has to be alive. Orium shouted as tears formed in her eyes. She shut her eyes and mumbled. He has to be alive. Just how can you be so sure? Tatsuki asked. He promised me. Ichigo promised me. Orium flashed the ring on her finger. He promised me he would come back. Ichigo never breaks a promise, you should know that, better than anyone. Tatsuki felt that if she continued to trample on Orium's feelings she might really crush Orium's spirit. Tatsuki was, unfortunately, unaware of the deep psychological damage to Orium's psyche and could only take what she saw on the surface. If she had known, she would not have said with a smile, "You're right, he never breaks a promise, Orium. I have to keep her spirits up." I don't have such a firm belief, but, she still believes, and when she no longer believes, Tatsuki looked at Orium with a serious stare, "I'll be there for her." Suddenly Tatsuki felt a warm ray of light on her back. She looked behind her at the sun peeking through the grey clouds. The time for sorrow was over, faithful or not, it was time to move on from this spot. Tatsuki began to walk away and stood atop a curved pile of concrete. She put her arms in her sleeves, lifted her hoodie up over her head and threw it into a puddle before removing her sweatpants from over her shoes. Tatsuki was wearing a tight-fitting black t-shirt underneath her hoodie that didn't cover her midriff and on her legs was wearing spandex shorts to match. In such a lack of clothing it was easy to see how mature Tatsuki's body had grown. It was slightly malnourished and the 30-year-old stood gazing out into the horizon, feeling reborn. Tatsuki bent her body back and arched her chest towards the sky. The sunlight is so warm. I feel renewed. I feel like me again. After basking in the glow of the sun, Tatsuki let out a weary cry and with a strike of her leg shattered the concrete and stood on ground level. She gripped her fist as she stared at her fingerless glove and flexed her arm, admiring the muscle tone. Tatsuki-chan. I'm not going to run away anymore, Tatsuki said as she put her arm down and spoke with a serious tone. We'll never be strong enough to eliminate Britannia, but if they want to try and take my life, her shoulders, back and upper arms coursed with flame, they're welcome to try. She looked back at Orium. Oi, she called to her, you sure he's still out there? Yes, Orium nodded, he probably has his reasons for not coming forward. But I'm sure Ichigo is still alive. Then I'm going to hold on to the same faith you are, Tatsuki said, Saigo no Kataki no Ryu. Tatsuki suited up into her familiar red-black draconic-style armor. Her wings appeared with a burst of flame. She beat them a few times to take to the air. Where are you going? Orium asked. I'm going to find a place where I won't be disturbed. I will stay in Japan. Tatsuki turned in Orium's direction and bent her shoulders back, sticking her chest forward as she let her arms hang at her sides. I will protect Japan from hollows and spirits, and while you're liberating Japan, I will keep it peaceful and search for Ichigo. If you really believe he's out there, we'll find him. See you around. Tatsuki then climbed high into the air and flew away far to the south tip of the country, arriving in very little time at all. She settled down along the coastline and took a moment to power down. She walked up to the nearest palm tree she could find. Might as well get started. Tatsuki then began using the tree as though she would aboard to wail against and start her exercise. She was only at it for a few minutes before a large Ryotsu entered her senses. Tatsuki immediately tensed up and powered up. Who's out there? She demanded to know. She looked behind her. Standing far away on the water was a figure garbed in all black. They looked like they were dressed in a shiakusho, but Tatsuki couldn't make any details out from this distance. Who is that? She made an approach, but a wave of water blocked her view and made the figure disappear from the horizon. Where did he? Tatsuki turned behind her sharply. The figure was up in the air, high above her, looking down. The figure was wearing a hood, obscuring their face. They were carrying a zanpakuto at their hipside and dressed in complete black. That's not Lelich, who? Before Tatsuki could make an estimated guess, the figure vanished. Tatsuki pondered the possibilities for a few minutes before shaking her head and palming her eye. No, that couldn't have been Ichigo. That Ryotsu was way too controlled to be him. Tatsuki took a deep breath. I'm sorry Orium, but I can't be as faithful as you. Tatsuki began practicing her martial arts on palm trees again. I cannot place blind faith that Ichigo is alive. She broke one tree and moved on to another. However, if you want to believe, then I will place my faith in your faith. If he really is out there, I want to see him soon. She broke another tree. And when I do, Tatsuki split a tree in half and smiled, I'm going to hit him as hard as I can for making us worry. Spring 2017 ATB. What started as a normal day for the former 11th Prince, Lelouch VI Britannia had turned into the day that would change his life forever. In less time than he ever thought possible, he had completely and utterly outwitted his half-brother Clovis, snuck into his room and now had him at gunpoint. He had learned nothing of his desire to know the truth behind his mother's death other than the fact that Clovis had told him that at the heart of mother's death were Schneeisel and Cornelia. And now that he had relinquished his hold on Clovis, the third prince was now panicking for his life. Wait, I had nothing to do with it. Clovis exclaimed. I believe you, Lelouch said, lowering his gun and smiling. Clovis let out a sigh of relief. However, a devilish smirk grew across his face and he took a step forward and re-aimed the gun at his older half-brother's face. Please. You can't. Clovis pleaded. We may have different mothers, but you and I are still blood. You can't change the world without getting your hands dirty, Lelouch said and pulled the trigger. Blood spattered and Clovis' body slumped over and he fell to the floor and blood poured from the open wound in his skull with the bullet lodged into the back of his chair. Lelouch lowered the gun and exited out of area and proceeded to head back for Ashford Academy. Moments later, Clovis' soul rose up from out of his body. Where am I? He wondered. He then saw the blood spattering the walls. Ah. Where did all this blood come from? Lelouch? Lelouch, where are you? He looked down at himself. He was floating. Why am I floating? He looked behind him. He looked at the body behind him. He screamed in horror. Soul Society. Voices chattered as a gathering of souls stood in front of the 10th Division Senkaimon. They were all new recruits, unseated members and low-ranking officers to Squad 10. Lelouch stood at the head of the pack, in front of the Senkaimon gate, facing them, tapping his foot. Rangiku stood at his side. Below the platform, facing into the crowd were 3rd seed Shisato, 5th seed Kyokaku, and 6th seeds Mei and Nozomi. They would be accompanying Lelouch on his expedition to the world of the living, but they wouldn't be the only ones. Dashing up the road, and towards the crowd, came 3 more Soul Reapers, 2 vice-captains and 1 captain. The 3 individuals were allowed through the crowd and the captain made her way to Lelouch, stopping to catch her breath, hands on her knees. She wouldn't normally be this out of breath, but she was really excited about this. Sorry I'm late Lelouch, she apologized. That's okay Momo, Lelouch smiled at her, 4th Division is really far from here. Besides, I haven't even addressed the squad properly yet. Good morning Lelouch Dano. Susanna waved with a smile. Lelouch waved and smiled at his wife. Morning. Isane, who was accompanying Momo on this mission, bowed to Lelouch. It's nice to see you again, Lelouch Teiko. So formal Isane-chan, really, Lelouch-kun is fine. Isane blushed. Lelouch looked back at Momo. Just the 2 of you, you aren't bringing any members of the relief division. Anohanasu Teiko has confidence that Isane and I should be plenty. Momo gestured to her vice-captain as she took a step to the side. There shouldn't be any Minos attacking and not all of your squad members are bad in healing Kido. Trust me, as long as you have the 2 of us I can guarantee that we won't be losing any division members unless someone's head explodes. To be able to say that so casually and speak with such confidence, Lelouch smiled with his mouth open slightly. Momo, you sure have come a long way, my apprentice. It was finally the time. After so many years of waiting, it was finally the time. Years ago, Lelouch had spoken with Anohana during a captain's meeting to arrange this little expedition. An expedition he now explained to his squad members. He cleared his throat before addressing everyone. Alright everyone, listen up. Lelich's powerful voice thundered. The chatting ceased immediately. You have all been selected to be part of a great expedition to the world of the living. I have been planning this expedition for years and you are all lucky enough to be a part of it. Some of you have only been here for a few months, but this expedition was planned out so far in advance so that you could be a part of it. We are about to trek into the world of the living. We will be there for at least a year and a half. Chatter started up again. Quiet. It ceased. We are going to Area 11, formerly known as Japan. All across it there will be an incident of which I have calculated for several years in advance now. Consos will need to be performed and hollows will need to be cleansed. There will be too many incidents for a single Soul Reaper to handle them all, and so you are all coming with me. Your fellow veteran officers, Stoame, Kyojo Nozomi, Shiba Kyokaku, and Aloman Shisato, your vice captain, Matsumoto Rangiku, and I, Lamprough Lelich, as well as the 7th Division Fukotaiko, Lamprough Susanna, and the 4th Division Taiko, Hinamori Momo, and Fukotaiko, Katetsu Isane, will be in charge of this mission. Each of us will be in charge of a section of you all. You will follow your orders as they are given. Food and supplies will be brought to us by go-betweens from the 4th Division. He looked at Momo. Yes. Hi, Momo nodded. My squad members know their assignments. Then we're all settled. Everyone, the time has come to move on towards this expedition. I'm sure many of you have questions, but it is not your place to ask. I am your captain and I am the man of whom you must place your trust in. I have given everything I can for the Soul Society for the last 143 years. No matter what you may see out there, that fact does not change. Now then, Lelich turned away and towards the Senkaimon. Let's move out. Area 17. As Cornelia stood leaning up against the side of her nightmare frame, she was downing a can of decaffeinated Pepsi and taking a moment to relax. Slaying Britannia's enemies was always thirsty business. Another day, another battle. She thought to herself. All in accordance with the plan. Princess Cornelia, Guilford ran up to her. Guilford, Cornelia pushed up off her nightmare and stood up. Something you need? Yes, we just received word from Japan from the Purist faction, ma'am. Viceroy Clovis has been murdered. You've been asked to take over. Cornelia stood thunderstruck. What? I have the data file here. Guilford handed her a file. Apparently his death was caused by a man calling himself Zero. Cornelia scowled as she read through the files and sneered at the images and documents in it. Damn it, Clovis, I told you your security was too lax. Look what's happened. His Majesty the Emperor is hoping you won't turn this assignment down. He knows how painful Japan has been for you, but he believes you are Britannia's only hope at crushing someone capable of murdering one of our own. You were able to take down Anardas, murderer of the late Empress Marianne. He knows you can do this. Pfft, the terrorists were framed for Marianne. Only an idiot believes the official story. Still, Cornelia eyed the pages in her hand and glanced at the color photograph taken of Zero. As she stared at it, something within her told her that she simply had to go to Japan. There was something about this that just seemed unnatural. Not unnatural like spiritually unnatural, but something about Zero rubbed Cornelia the wrong way, and it started with the concealment of his identity. What kind of terrorist hides his face? Anardas never wore a mask, so why does this man feel the need to conceal himself? Is he not confident? Or does he have some reason to conceal himself? Cornelia hated all enemies of the Empire, but she liked to personalize her hatred, which is why she was thinking on this so deeply. Guilford. Yes, my princess. The general saluted. Make a phone call to the Empire. I want Euphemia established as sub-viceroy. Guilford blinked. Are you sure you want to put your sister in that kind of danger? Danger or not, if I am to take a viceroy position I won't be returning to Britannia anytime soon. I won't leave Yuffie unattended. Understood, I'll make the call. Is there anything else you need, my princess? Yes, call Darlton. Tell him I want him and some of his men in on this mission also. Yes, your highness. Guilford saluted and walked away. Zero, Cornelia thought to herself as she looked back at the paper and pages, I don't know who you are or where you came from, but anyone with the gall to attack the Empire and murder one of its children will pay the penalty. I hope you know the kind of grave you've dug yourself into. 0 Because when I arrive in Japan, you will breathe your last. End of chapter 155. Check the description for the links to the author.